give her presentation for the day. Jackie, please take over.
Thank you. Okay, can somebody confirm you're seeing the full screen?
Yeah, we are seeing the full screen. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. So Dr. Tonapi, Dr. Ramesh Kalgatagi, Dr. Gowda, honored participants, ladies and gentlemen. As I went through this very detailed and well thought through program, for this keynote address, I've simply taken the title of the national seminar and tried to put as many of the strands together as I can to give you food for thought and the opportunities to look beyond your own personal areas of interest as you go through the rest of the program. As Dr. Tonapi said, I'm bringing almost 30 years of experience across Africa and Asia and bringing my own personal thoughts into this. And one of the key things that comes to me is that meeting the SDGs, particularly SDG 2, has too many challenges. We have war, civil unrest, climate change, pandemics, demands to produce more food with less land and fewer inputs. It's a real challenge. So in stark contrast from our over-reliance on the big three, the rice, wheat, and maize, there's 30,000 plant species which are edible, of which over 7,000, such as the millets, fonio, teff, yam, cassava, bambra, groundnut, jackfruit, mangosteen, sesame, okra. The list is endless. But those are still parts of the diets of many communities around the world. But with the rise of industrial agriculture, for the best of reasons, the diversity on our plates has reduced. Less so in India, I must admit, but very much so in other countries, because those crops amenable to large-scale farming have come to dominate our diets. And why is this an issue? To me, it's because although there are economies of scale, there is greater potential risk of climate change and other issues when we don't have diversity on farms, especially for our smallholder farmers. A recent analysis of over 2.5 million yield observations from National Agricultural Census data has documented the widespread stagnation of yield growth. So maize, soybean, wheat, and rice are crucial. Wheat and rice particularly feed people, almost minimally livestock. Stagnating food grain yields combined with the growing population is a prospect that we really should avoid. If you look at that picture, you'll see rice production. You'll also see some pollution in the background. Estimates of greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, which is about 1/4 of the global greenhouse gas emissions, ranges from about 15 to 20% from direct farming activities. If food production is more broadly defined to include processing, packaging, transport, sale of agricultural products, and so on, then the greenhouse gas emissions are up to about 43 to 57%. Agriculture contributes quite a lot. I'm not going to be talking about mitigation. Later, I will talk about adaptation. At the beginning, in the first half of this presentation, I want to discuss the problems that climate change is bringing us. Water is one of our most precious commodities. We often don't have enough, and sometimes we have too much, with accompanying flooding. And I heard from Dr. Ramesh just now that Hyderabad is really hot. Oh yes, but when it rains, oh my goodness, it's pouring down the streets. It's that sort of thing, that combination that we're going to have to deal with. But we're becoming more and more reliant on bore wells rather than capturing rainwater.
Hello?
And groundwater depths vary according to geology, also according to replenishment and usage. In general, our water tables, particularly in the hotter and drier areas, are falling by about half a meter per year, 30 centimeters to 50 centimeters per year from water extraction. We need potable water, drinkable water. We also need water for agriculture and for industry. And I was curious at what the water table is doing globally. And the Punjab, as you all know, has been suffering issues on the drop of the groundwater. In many places, it's about 30 meters. In Texas, which I imagine to be very dry, 23 meters. Alice Springs, right in the middle of Australia, very arid, is between 15 and 90 meters down. And in the Gobi Desert, a real desert, it's between 50 and 170 meters down. That is a long way, and the more we draw and the less we replenish, the worse it's going to get. Globally, we do have enough food, but it's often in the wrong place at the wrong time and not affordable. We've got to be more efficient while at the same time preserving our environment for ourselves and future generations. Overnutrition is often a result of our lifestyles. Undernutrition is often because of the food, especially nutritious food, is simply not available. Food crops grow well in temperate or cooler zones. Crops in the tropics often have pest and disease issues, as well as eroded and infertile soils to contend with. So climate change is impacting all of us, and it will continue and will cause warming and extreme weather events, even if we maximize our response right now. We've got rising sea levels, climatic events, increased water flow in rivers from meltwater, which puts the coast at risk. Future population, if you look at the diagram to the right, exposure to inundation with a 1 in a 100-year event and sea level rise. Europe has a lot of coastal areas, highly productive in terms of agriculture, and it's at risk. But look at Asia. The number of people at risk is going to be very high, up to about double the current level of 47 million people at risk. We've got to do something about these matters. And all these impacts affect us in different ways. Agriculture, coasts, our ecologies, in which everything survives, our water, our trees, our power, our transport, health, society. And I'm going to briefly touch on these interlocking issues. For our crops, we know that increased levels of CO2 should help most plants grow faster. With CO2 increased, we're going to expect temperature shifts, climatic events. These will reduce yields. High productivity comes with the risk of different partitioning of photosynthase, different accumulation of micronutrients. Our crops may grow faster, but they may not have better grain and forage quality. It may be worse. Pollinators may not be available. Flowering may be affected by frost. Heat, pollen in hotter zones may become inviable, and pests and diseases may become more prevalent, and new pests may become a problem. If we look at livestock, and just out of interest, the USA consumes 36 million metric tons of meat and poultry annually. But apart from heat stress, which reduces fertility and milk production, there may be less fodder. With all of this, there's likely to be change in veterinary practices to minimize parasites, and other health treatments are going to be needed in response to climate-induced increases in pests, diseases, microbes. You're going to get those pesticides into the food chain. Fisheries, marine and freshwater are likely to be affected too. Temperature changes, currents, water flow, they affect reproduction and migration. and the growth of farmed fish as well. That's especially so because in shallow water, the temperatures of the water are going to go up. So contained tanks and ponds will suffer more. Higher temperatures can bring in more diseases to fish as well. Shellfish may be unable to incorporate soluble calcium into their shells because of acidification of the ocean. Coastal areas, in many cases, they are under threat, and we resort to defenses, coastal defenses, to protect our coasts. Apart from disruptions to the ecosystems, underwater and above water, and to the livelihoods along the coasts of the people, including tourism, major disruptions will also affect transportation and the ability to use the coastline and the oceans for transport. Our ecosystems are being affected today, even if we don't look as far forward as 2050. Our mountains, the Arctic ecosystems are particularly vulnerable. Warming of our environment melts snow and ice, resulting in rising sea levels, and also the potential for floods from mountain ecosystems from the meltwater. So the ice melts in the Himalayas, and you see the problem in India and Bangladesh. Our water, so precious, is being affected by climate change. The image, excuse me, shows what happens on the left when precipitation is impeded. Drought, dry lands, less productivity. We can also get saltwater incursion into coastal water supplies for drinking and irrigation. On the right, where there's more precipitation, higher humidity, and equally less productivity because this climate situation was not anticipated in that particular area. Our forests, so important to us as an ecology, and they've been challenged by mankind ever since we started farming. They've been challenged by the need to produce more food for timber and other tree products. We're seeing major forest fires being reported. Many start naturally, and forest fires have always been part of the ecosystem, but these fires seem to be bigger and are impinging on our lives and much more, burning homes, towns, and destroying forest livelihoods. So energy, the greater our population, the greater consumers that we are, the more energy we need. In summer, like in Hyderabad, we want to be cool. In winter, we need to keep warm. We need power to process food, for transportation, to make consumer products. We've seen what disruption to oil supplies has done to Europe when there was the restriction on bringing oil from Russia. And what has that done to the cost of energy and those ripple effects moving down to the consumers in the end? Climate change, sea level rise, extreme weather events will disrupt power supply even further. Even trying to produce green power can be challenging. Storms can disrupt wind turbines, pollution and dust reduce the efficiency of solar panels, hydroelectric power needs water, but the water might not be available. On human health, climate change impacts our health. The hotter it is, the more uncomfortable we feel, the less productive we are. Working at 40 degrees Celsius is a bit difficult and not good for you. The warmer the climate becomes, we can expect more diseases, a less good prognosis from lifestyle diseases, poor air quality from dust, smoke, and inversion layers trapping city pollution, bearing in mind that half our population will be urban by 2050. It seems to me that our health sectors are going to have a huge cost burden to try and manage the impact of climate change on our health and productivity. This image is self-explanatory. Storms, flooding, wind, cold, ice, all affect our transport systems. And while in the medium and long term, we can plan to address those, in the short term, the impact disrupts our lives and cost of transport will increase as the number of options available for us decreases. Those disruptions of transport seem out of scope almost for agriculture, but they affect food production, processing, and distribution. Where transport is hampered, we see some of the bigger incidences of food loss, famine, starvation. From what I've been saying, climate change affects each and every one of us, our environments, our food systems. Where we as individuals are affected, our families are affected, and our societies are affected. Our cities are getting hotter. They flood more easily. Transport systems are needed to bring the food to our doors, and they're vulnerable. And as our systems and our societies become more stressed, it will be the poor, the disadvantaged, and the vulnerable who will suffer the most. The Ipcc report for 2022 highlights these points. Agricultural productivity growth has slowed, particularly in the mid and low altitudes, and much of Africa and South Asia is situated in those latitudes, which are regions with high populations, high levels of poverty, hunger, and food and nutrition insecurity. The report mentions the key biological events that I've mentioned, flowering, for example, which is likely to become affected. Pests and disease will increase and control will be more difficult, more costly. And the impacts on food availability and nutritional quality will increase the number of people at risk of hunger, malnutrition, and diet-related mortality. Sorry, excuse me. All those climate issues that I brought to your attention will interact with everything else. Where we make a change in one area, almost everything else shifts. Some of those outcomes will be deliberate, things that we've put forward, as Dr. Tonapi said, in a policy paper. But there will be many, many unintended consequences that we can't even imagine. So there are no easy answers. And that's why we're all gathered here today and tomorrow. There are some solutions. There are some promising approaches, and I'll go through some of them. But I want you to keep remembering that although we're talking about agriculture here, and agriculture, I'm not even going to talk about the livestock and the fisheries, just crops. Everything we do to those crops has a roll-on effect somewhere and somehow, whether it's to the soil, the environment, the transportation, the forests, the societies, the way we get our income, how do we transport materials to the farms and back out. There are so many possibilities, and that's why we need multidisciplinary discussions in the hopes that we'll capture most of the unintended consequences while we go for the outputs and outcomes that we envision for the future. Remembering that the future, none of us can see. We're using all the data we can to model it, but we really don't know what's going to happen. COVID, we couldn't have even guessed that you were going to have a global pandemic. So I strongly believe we have to modernize our agricultural systems to make them more efficient, to make agriculture more resilient. Farmers are risk averse, and they should be, because their livelihoods come from the soil. And agriculture is known for being super conservative. Nonetheless, somehow we need to change the way our farmers farm so that the farming systems become more resilient and the productivity is increased sustainably. We must modernize if we're going to feed the growing population without cutting down more forests, without restricting other things. Even if to meet the sustainable development goals in the short, medium term, it's going to be difficult. And we've got to consider, let's say 2050, because it's almost imaginable to most of us. We've got to feed and nourish those generations. Digital platforms might not be modern outside of agriculture. but used properly, can create a step change in our agricultural systems, because digital platforms by their very nature create a facilitating environment, both for farmers, private sector, and to make agriculture profitable at all scales. These tools are very critical, and there's so many advances, as I said, outside of agriculture, but that muddy, literally, interface between technologies and the practicalities of producing food on the ground does not always support the uptake of new technologies. But with the right digital tools, farming will become logical, decisions based on data, not guesswork and experience, and we can have transparency in supply chains so that we can better manage the farms and our environment. And if we can get those right tools, the absolute right tools, to the farmers and the value chain actors, we won't have to take them to them. There will be a technology pull, and the technology will be wanted so much that our partners will need to work very hard to ensure that there is enough of the technology at scale and with the necessary support. Disruptive technologies bring change. They're also a little bit scary because they're disrupting what we know to be the world. But we do have opportunities in natural resource management, nutrient management and soil, pest and disease control, post-harvest, finance, and also in aggregation. I put it to you that nutrient and natural resource management can be done haphazardly with your experience. You look at the soil, you look at the plants, and maybe wishful thinking, or to ensure yields at whatever cost you put on whatever inputs you need. But we can make it so much more cost effective using sensors and artificial intelligence to minimize wastage and contamination and pollution. But the tools must be very well tested. The outputs must be buying into the risk-averse nature of agriculture. The instruments have to be robust, solid, reliable, climate-proofed, and the information to our farmers clear, easy to understand, and above all, easy to implement. To support the farmer, we need to get our technologies out quickly. One hurdle has always been the time taken to get tested new varieties to the farmers. In the past, it could have taken 10, 15 or more years of trial and error, and we do not have that luxury in the face of climate change. We need to breed new varieties for 5 years' time for a future climate and environment. So we can shorten the breeding cycle of many crops so that the new varieties can be tested and released sooner. We also have gene editing now, a possibility to improve the quality of the crops, the varieties going out. We need seed systems that will pick up the new varieties very quickly, multiply them very fast, assuring seed quality, and get the seed to the farmers as soon as possible. As I said, a scientist can fix the breeding, but there's everything else around getting the varieties there, making sure they're the right ones that the consumers want, that the value addition needs. We know those consequences, the unintended ones, unknown. With the pests and diseases I've been talking about that may increase in numbers very quickly in new climate, we could get new ones coming in, strong winds blow new pests in. The new weather systems is going to aggravate that situation. And I keep telling people that many years ago when I was in Nigeria, we had those really heavy duty satellite phones. Then mobile phones came into play, the very simple ones, and then smartphones like this one. I don't recall a lot of advertising for those phones. Everybody wanted them. Everybody wants them now. Almost everybody has got a mobile phone. Nigeria, a lot of countries in West Africa took a step change. They bypassed having landlines and went straight for mobile phone technology. a step change, and that was technology pull. So that's why I keep saying that our technologies should be so good that the farmers demand them more and more. So going back to the mobile phones that almost every farmer has around the world, the great thing about having the applications on their mobile phones is that the decision-making can be in their hands. And that is vital to speed up the farmer's response time, in this case to pests and diseases, so that the crop can be saved and quality produce harvested. And with proper timely advice, this should also minimize the use of inputs, pesticides generically, as the farmer will be given accurate advice and won't have the unnecessary expense on unneeded application of pesticides. And these applications, such as Plantix, covers 30 crops as in 18 languages. I'm very proud of it coming from Ipcc. However, what about the new crops that we're going to have to grow in a changing climate, or the pests and diseases that haven't come yet, but as a plant pathologist, I'm expecting them to come very soon. I mentioned minimizing food loss, produce loss, food wastage, while at the same time assuring that more of the cost that the consumer pays goes back to the farmer. It has to find its way back to the farm gate. We have too many middlemen in the way. All our crops are vulnerable to loss and waste, whether from field pests, the absence of a cold chain for horticultural produce, storage pests in silos, fungi releasing toxins, off flavors, and so on. The system after harvest has been so heavily reliant on the consolidators and middlemen. And I look for the transparency, the shortest possible value chains, and the opportunities to minimize loss and deterioration, to maximize value addition and money going back to the farmers. We'll get this transparency if we can give more information, more data, and with produce tracking, so we know what's happened to it. For example, through blockchain. And with climate change, crop insurance becomes even more important. Farming is becoming more risky. The unknown and the unexpected can happen at any time. In Asia, only about 22% of smallholder farmers have access to insurance, while in sub-Saharan Africa, it's 3%. There is a high transaction cost from collecting premium amounts, which are very often small, and then you have to carry out the loss assessment in case of adverse weather events. Digital platforms, remote sensing can eliminate the pain points. So this is all about the managing of the consequences of climate change. So adaptation and not mitigation. And to further adapt, if you recall right at the beginning, I was saying rice, wheat, and maize, economies of scale. Those farms for those crops are huge. Fields cover many hundreds of hectares. Large machinery such as combine harvesters are often working in teams to harvest the crops. If we can aggregate farm equipment digitally, I was using the Uber example, if we can aggregate the farm equipment in the global south, because not everybody, small scale farmers cannot afford the big equipment. If we can have small farm, large field approach, promote mechanization of agriculture and those economies while cutting down on costs, but still ensuring that we generate employment at the village level, district level. We need to encourage entrepreneurs. We need to make sure that there is opportunity to bring in funding, microfinance somehow. The startups in this space, particularly in the Uberization of farm equipment, are serving millions of smallholder farmers. But we need to assure quality service from these service providers to add value to the farming rather than the cost of the service pricing it out of the reach of the farmers. So as I was talking, we had the picture of the globe with the spider's web of all the linkages of what's going to happen with climate change. And even as I was talking of simple things like new varieties, we're responding to climate change. And yet, as we put those new varieties in, it's affecting the soil, it's affecting what we do to the varieties, it's affecting the value addition, it affects the transportation. Everything is so interlinked. And I could see in some of the roundtable discussions later, we have some very knowledgeable people focusing on their subject areas, which is vital. I often feel that we speak multidisciplinary, but we don't often do it. We try very hard, but particularly in government, trying to get different ministries to work together, to try and get the health system, for example, to say, climate change, malaria might be increasing, that's a bit obvious because it affects us all. What are they seeing in health about the effects in Hyderabad on the non-communicable diseases where people cannot afford to keep cool? So we have so many challenges to feed and nourish our population. And some of those challenges are caused by us. Mildly embarrassing. We know that we cut down forests. We know that we cement over our cities because it makes it easier to move around, but stops the groundwater percolating away. So some of these challenges are due to our action and also due to our inaction. And climate change, for me in agriculture, is such a challenge because our food and nutrition systems are so multifaceted, so networked and interwoven and form a three-dimensional net where everything is affecting everything else. But almost 4 dimensions because time moving forwards, everything is going to get more and more complex with more challenges being thrown at us. So these challenges need us to look at the very best of our current technologies and to work in a multidisciplinary way, a genuine multidisciplinary way, to find the solutions that we and our planet so desperately need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jacqueline Hughes. It was really wonderful to listen to you. Overall issues related to climate change, how the dynamics of existing interplays between the climate, the value chains, the people's lives, and the entire gamut of activities put together, it's going to affect. I think it is our action plan that needs to be put in. Probably we will seek your advice when we prepare the policy paper and put together and put it to the governments. So thank you very much, madam. So thanks for your time. So Dr. CLL Gowda, sir, for your comments, chairman's comments, please.
Yeah, thank you.
Sir, you are muted. Unmute. Unmute, sir.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. So Dr. Jackie Hughes has given us a full overview about the climate change and its impact and what we should be doing. And she did mention about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, Ipcc's 6th assessment report that was released on 4th of April. And that report clearly says that we can no longer lose time or in finding new excuses not to act. And it also says that we have no time to lose. And there are a few salient points that came up in that report. And number one is that whether you like it or not, the world will be going towards a 1.5 degrees Celsius temperature rise by 2040. And of course, the main trigger for this global warming is mostly the human activities, including agriculture that Dr. Jackie Hughes mentioned, and also that the huge carbon sinks that we have in the world, including the forests and other trees, the efficiency of these sinks to absorb the greenhouse gas emissions is also going down. So, although India's contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions between 1870 and 2019 is only about 3%, this does not mean that India need not act, because India is a big country with a huge population of 1.4 billion, and we do have lots of concerns. And the Ipcc report on climate change does indicate the global climate risk index, and India is among the top countries that will be most affected by the climate change. And on a broader level, although India may be producing enough food for its global population, because of the technological and institutional innovations that have happened in the country, but many studies also suggest that the climate change has already affected crop production in India. And a report by the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Agriculture in 2019, at that time itself, it estimated that the climate change related losses are between 4 to 10% of the agricultural economy each year, which indicates an overall GDP loss about 1.2%. Although India has begun to pay more attention on the ways in which the impacts of the climate change can be addressed, the climate change policy of the Indian agriculture also has a focus on adaptation and developing adaptive capacity of the farmers, which is important because nearly 85% of the Indian agriculture is smallholder farmers, and most of these smallholder farmers, especially in the dry areas, are affected, and adaptation for these smallholder farmers is a bigger issue of survival rather than anything else. So the National Mission on Sustainable Agriculture, also under the aegis of the National Action Plan on Climate Change, has made a series of adaptation measures that looks at promoting location-specific improved agronomic practices that focus on integrated farming, water use efficiency, soil health management, and resource conservation, especially in the rain-fed areas. Dr. Jackie Hughes covered many of these areas very eloquently. I don't need to go into the details of that. And the Government of India's development plans in the agriculture sector is focusing on soil and water management, diversification of crop production, optimization of the cropping systems, sharing of the risk in terms of engaging the community, risk transfer in terms of diversification of the farming systems into crop, livestock, and fishery diversification, and looking at the improved localized forecasting and advisory system. Dr. Jackie Hughes again mentioned about the agro advisory using many of the technologies, disruptive technologies that have come up in the recent years. And she also talked about the bad effects of climate change in terms of areas being affected by floods and by drought, and we need to build a better disaster management system. And we also need to look at the scale as well as the scope of the potential impacts of climate on the agricultural sector that warrants a shift from the current practice of sector-specific programs and schemes and mainstream the climate change concerns across the development programs such as agriculture, forestry, land use management, water and health, as well as in the process of planning natural, socioeconomic, and demographic conditions in the country. So the need for adaptation to climate change varies from place to place depending on the sensitivity and vulnerability of the environmental impacts. And this adaptation to climate change is very important in the developing countries such as India, since, as I mentioned in the risk index, India is one of the countries mostly affected, and because these developing countries are more vulnerable to the climate change and are bearing the brunt of this effects of global warming. Although the human adaptive capacity is unevenly distributed across the different regions and populations, the developing countries have less capacity to adapt, and the adaptive capacity is closely also linked to the social and economic development. In general, higher levels of human development means higher adaptive capacity, but some of these development areas locks people into certain patterns and behaviors, and these need to be changed. And the economic costs of these adaptation to climate change are likely to cost billions of dollars and over the next several decades. And this definitely means that we need to act quickly, which also means the countries and the international agencies need to put in more money into climate change adaptation, but also look at the mitigation aspects as well. So with this, I would now like to thank Dr. Jacqueline Hughes for her keynote address, which really covered quite a lot of areas, and she has brought in many issues that can go into the policy paper that Dr. Vilas Tonapi mentioned. And with this, I would like to close my remarks here and hand over to Dr. Tonapi. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir, Dr. CLL Gowda, and also Dr. Jacqueline Hughes for your time and also enlightening about 200 plus people who joined the inaugural session. So we look forward to your advice, guidance, madam, and we will be interacting with you and take your advice. So thank you very much for your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, sir, before I think now we can start the session 2. It's about the climate change concerns. Though we had a suggestion of break, but we will have a break after the next session.
Okay.
So session 2 is climate change concerns and challenges for India. And we have two very learned people. One is Dr. Sanjay Vashisht, Director, Climate Action Network, South Asia, that is Cancer. Then Dr. Prabhakar, Principal Scientist from CREDA, who participated recently in the intergovernmental panel discussions and also participate in the total deliberations very recently. And I think he would be highlighting on the reports and also the climate change scenario in relation to the points for the plan of actions. So may I now request Sanjay Vashisht. Let me introduce Sanjay Vashisht to all of the people who are here. Basically, he is a forester with graduation and post-graduation in forestry from India. He completed his master's in agroforestry from Gujarat Agricultural University and graduation in forestry from Konkan Krishi Vidyapeeth, Maharashtra. He has 14 years of experience in natural resource management and implementation of adaptation in key sectors and following international climate change discussions on various platforms for future climate change regime. To add a bit again to his very wonderful career in terms of climate action scenario, he is actually now the director of Climate Action Network South Asia and is actively working in the civil society in relation to climate crisis, the climate policies in South Asian countries. Under his leadership, CANSA has increased its membership more than 200 plus, and the non-governmental organizations that have spread across South Asian countries. So the network has successfully documented the sectoral information, the climate impacts, and also the responses in South Asia. So Sanjay Vashisht has been advisor to climate policy paradigm of Henrik Burrell Foundation in India, and he is the fellow with the Energy Resource Institute in New Delhi. And many more accomplishments to his credit. I now request Sanjay Vashisht to kindly enlighten us on journey from Rio to Glasgow and lessons for the future. So Sanjay Vashisht sir, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Tonapi. Thank you for nice introduction. This also, reminds me I need to update my profile. I have been active in, research and civil society space since 1998. So it's been almost 24 years now. And let me introduce Climate Action Network South Asia before let me also share my slides. I hope you all can see this.
Yeah.
Go
to the full slide view, sir.
Yes. So Climate Action Network South Asia is a global network with more than 1,500 organizations, NGOs as our member organizations in 130 countries. We are in South Asia as their representative in 8 countries, and we are more than 300 organizations now. So only NGOs who are working on climate change, they can become member. We don't have individual membership. And CANSA has been following climate negotiations. CANSA has been working on ground, implementing climate solutions along with committees, and also working with policymakers on providing technical knowledge to them. And one of the prime responsibility for us is to also spread awareness about climate change. What climate change is, what kind of phenomena it is, how dangerous it is, how to deal with it. So all that has been our phenomena. It's really honor to talk to, in my own fraternity, because I come from State Agriculture University. I studied in Maharashtra, then I studied in Gujarat. So it's really an honor to talk to the technical minds today. What I'm going to do in next half an hour or so is I'll present the journey from Rio to Glasgow. Rio was the one when UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, was agreed in 1992. I'll touch upon the milestones in between, which was very crucial, and we cannot afford to skip them. Then I'll come on India, how India is implementing climate action, and then I'll conclude by sharing some lessons from on the global discourse, how we should see global discourse. So let me start with this graph of how the negotiations has been. So I'm going to speak for last 30 years, starting from 1992 to 2022, where we are. And 1992, Rio, everybody felt that there is some phenomena which is affecting our seasons, and we need to understand it. We need to start deciphering it, unpack it. So there was first assessment report of Ipcc, and they said yes, there is a phenomena called climate change. In fact, the term that was used at that point of time was also global warming, which was later on rectified to right term, which is climate change. So almost 154 countries agreed that we need a voluntary approach. We need to solve this problem, and the source is fossil fuels, and we need to stopping the use of or start phasing out fossil fuels. See, so the voluntary approach didn't work till 1995, 96, because nobody was doing anything. Everybody made a promise. And then in Berlin, everybody realized, oh, no, we need a legal commitment. We need to hold some countries accountable, and they should be able to, start the initiative followed by other countries. And then in Japan, in Kyoto Protocol was agreed in 1997. That's when developed countries, there was an annex with all the developed countries that was listed down. And these countries were told to reduce certain number of percentage of their global, their greenhouse gas emissions compared to a benchmark. And everybody was fine. Everybody was very happy when they left Kyoto Protocol. But then Kyoto Protocol was a political decision. It needed to be converted into an architecture, legal architecture that would ensure implementation. While Kyoto Protocol was, the politics was that Kyoto Protocol was ensured by President Bill Clinton, and after that,
We can't hear. There is no problem. I think it's the speaker, some network issue with the speaker.
Ramesh, you can.
I think we lost audio.
Maybe with some bandwidth issue, we may switch off our videos. Probably that might help.
I think he's disconnected, sir.
We can hear his voice.
Ramesh, you can call him, sir.
Any problem is that Dr. Prabhakar is there already joined.
Can you hear me, Ilangon?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then I think.
The problem is from Sanjay's side.
Yeah, it looks like.
Someone can call him. Someone can please call him.
No, I have
Yeah,
called
he's
him
calling.
joining back. There was a problem with the laptop and he's joining back.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are some of the unintended problems with the webinars. We can't help it. We can't also do anything.
But anyway, sir, we are early now. 10 minutes we have gained because of not giving the break.
Yeah, maybe if somebody has called, otherwise we
he
can
has
maybe
joined.
start the.
Yeah, he has joined. He has joined.
I'm sorry about that. My
Yeah.
laptop suddenly crashed, so and I don't know. I need to figure it out. So basically, the 30 years journey has been two cycles. I'll put it this way: two cycles. First cycle has been agree on a global treaty. Then you wait and prepare a rule book. After that, the rule book is almost when the rule book is complete, and then the legal enforcement of that treaty comes in force. And then after that, you start implementing. So that has been the two cycles. We are in the second cycle, last stage. So as I said, this first bar shows the first cycle, almost first cycle, 1992 to 1997, Unfccc, and then the top, basically a Kyoto Protocol was agreed. Then US refused to ratify Kyoto Protocol after ensuring that it is agreed between the countries, because President George Bush too said we don't want to be part of this treaty. And then after that, we waited till 2005 when Russia ratified, and Kyoto Protocol became a legal law. And then the implementation from 2005 till 2012, the implementation, and then again Paris Agreement was agreed in 2015. Then rule book preparation till 2020, and now we are in the process of implementing, Paris Agreement. So that has been the two cycles. I just wanted to present. So as I said, Rio was the one where everybody thought that it can be done voluntary. They realized in COP1, no, nobody is working on it. We are still missing the main objective of bringing climate change or stopping the climate change. Then legally binding commitment was agreed for almost 5.6% of global emissions was distributed among developed countries, basically industrialized countries who has been polluting historically. And then Marrakesh Accord in 2001 was when the rule book was agreed for Kyoto Protocol. And then, first meeting, it was done in 2005 when Kyoto Protocol became a legal law after Russia ratified. US remained outside of Kyoto Protocol. Then after that, the implementation, while the implementation was going on, there was a parallel work of also discussing the second commitment period. So that has been the cycle. Let me start my other slides. And I think I'll just share some of the details of the key milestones. 1992, UNFCCC, a bigger circle. Please visualize it as a bigger circle in which a Kyoto Protocol was a smaller circle within the convention. So it was agreed that there will be a global equity. Basically, developed countries will have the largest share of emissions and therefore should take the lead. And why? Because the Industrial Revolution in around 1850, when coal was being used as a major source of energy, since then, developed countries has been polluting, of course, they have been polluting out of ignorance. They really knew that it will cause climate change, but still, a crime has been there. It has affected the way we live. Climate change has affected our lifestyles, our livelihoods also, and that's why developed countries have to take lead. It was agreed in the convention. Global efficiency, cost effectiveness. The action will be cost effectiveness. It should not be too expensive. For example, moving half of the population to Mars or Moon could be very expensive compared to the cost of action we need to undertake here. Basically, we need to change our development trajectory in the most cost effectiveness manner. Third is precautionary principle: anticipate, prevent, and minimize cause of climate change. And basically, this is also applicable to those who work on disaster risk reduction: anticipate, prevent, and minimize. And that's the precautionary principle on which UNFCCC is anchored. Common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. Developed countries to take most responsibilities, because the common responsibility is that we need to stop climate change. but the respective capability is based on how much has been your historic footprint, how much is your income, in which income category you fall, whether you are least developing country or medium developing country or industrialized or developed country. So and this is also related to global equity, that your share of responsibility will be decided accordingly. In fact, Can South Asia has also part of a global consortium. We have also calculated the fair share of all countries in terms of the responsibilities they have. Well, that's going to be a different presentation in future, but I just want to share that we are basically, as society, been holding developed countries responsible for ambitious action. This is the second milestone, COP3 in Kyoto Protocol. Third conference of parties held in Kyoto, and that's when everybody realized we need a legal binding commitment. Voluntary will not work. So Kyoto Protocol had legally binding commitment, came into enforcement in 6 June 2007. 174 countries and one regional economic integration, basically European Union, they deposited instrument of ratification, and Australia and US decided to be out of it. And it came into force because, so there was a formula for any, even Paris Agreement, even for Kyoto Protocol, the formula was that at least 50% of the emissions, countries whose cumulative emissions are more than 50%, once they ratify, then the Kyoto Protocol comes into enforcement. So that happened when Russia ratified. Powerful, complicated, and taking. It was certainly a first step in the right direction. Not ambitious, we were not happy about it, but it was first step in the right direction. The Kyoto Protocol shares convention objectives based on principles and institutions, and it was certainly an excellent moment in terms of unilateral, decision-making process. What did we achieve in the first cycle? By the time we finished first cycle of legal binding commitment, rule book, legal binding commitment coming into force, and then implementation. And that showed that out of 2 pillars, 1 pillar was very stronger, and the second pillar was, very weak. And that's what we need to look at later on. Reduction of greenhouse gases by Annex 1 countries or parties. And basically in greenhouse gas, methane is 1, carbon dioxide 1, nitrous oxide is 1. I'm referring to methane and nitrous oxide especially because they are linked with the agriculture sector. So they needed to be reduced. And there are 6 gases of that needed to be reduced globally. First commitment period 2008 to 2012, 4 years of implementation. Kyoto Protocol came into force, basically legally binding. So a protocol with teeth. There was also mechanisms. Mechanisms means, and this is also linked with cost effectiveness. You all must have heard about clean development mechanism. So that was one mechanism which we all know, and how technology transfer took place, and how funds basically there was more action in developing countries because of these mechanisms rather than developed countries. I normally blame these mechanisms as a pulley system or a porter system. So rather than developed countries lifting their own luggage as a burden, they hired developing countries to lift the burden or to lift that burden on themselves, and they took the credit of reduction. Clean development mechanism, joint implementation, emission trading. These are 3 mechanisms that came into force, which are part of the Kyoto Protocol. Future greenhouse gas reduction commitments. It also started talking about what will be the future greenhouse gas reduction commitment. So everybody expected that as soon as the Kyoto Protocol will finish on 31st December 2012, from 1st January 2013, second commitment period will start, which didn't happen because Paris Agreement came into force much later. It was agreed in 15 and it came into force in 2016. So certainly there was a gap of almost 4 years. So that was mitigation pillar. So certainly there was legally binding commitment, countries taking over responsibility, identification of countries who will basically take responsibility. So everything was done. What kind of mechanisms will ensure effective implementation? Everything was done. Adaptation. Dr. Govada also mentioned about adaptation. So let's see in after first cycle of climate talks where adaptation was. all countries need to adapt to adverse effects of climate change. A statement which is very generic, applicable to all, but no clarity on what does it mean in terms of adverse effects, what does it mean in terms of adaptation. Developed countries shall provide resources to developing countries to meet cost of adaptation. Didn't happen. Not at all. It was ODA that was recycled and that was being used for climate finance, for adaptation. And at that point of time, there was no green climate fund as well. So there was no separate climate finance mechanism in place. Forget about additional climate finance. No comprehensive mechanism, which would have, for example, today we have comprehensive mechanisms on adaptation. For example, there has been a levy of on coal, as coal says, within India, where money is being mobilized for climate change. There is a national adaptation fund within India. Globally, there is a Unfccc adaptation fund, and then there is green climate fund, where 50% of money goes into adaptation. But at that point of time, I'm referring to this by 2012, or no, not even 2012, 2008, 2009, when the implementation started, there was nothing on adaptation. Existing funding mechanism was only three. Adaptation fund was created because CDM was giving some money, 2% of its levy, and that money was creating adaptation fund. There is a green, there is a Jeff Trust Fund, normally controlled by US, by the way. Least developing country and special climate change fund in UNFCCC, which is more, which had very less money and more to support least developing country rather than overall adaptation scenario. And of course, there was one stream which would have discussed how adaptation should be negotiated in future. That was long-term cooperative action, ad hoc working group on long-term cooperative action. Sorry about acronyms, but that is for my reference. I'm trying to make it as simple as possible, and I'm trying to put it into a story for all of you. Finance and technology, of course, runs across. Now, that's the second cycle I'm referring to. So in 2007, the process this was the overlap period when Kyoto Protocol was going on. The discussion about second commitment period started in Bali, in Indonesia in 2007. And then everybody hoped that by 2009, there will be a second commitment that will be agreed into, and it will start from 2013. It didn't happen. So the original Bali process started from 2007 to 2009. And in in Copenhagen, where President Obama also visited Copenhagen, the negotiation collapsed. No deal was made. And then it was the post-recovery, post-reconstruction of Copenhagen. Copenhagen has been the blackest spot in the history of climate negotiations so far, where at the last moment when deal would have been done, it fell down because of higher political pressure and high-level political intervention. Cancun reconstruction, Durban reconstruction, and in Doha it was agreed, okay, by 2015 we will have an agreement and let's start working on it. And in 2015, Paris agreement was agreed. And what does Paris agreement says? Well, Paris agreement, what are the reflections? It talks about the first time that we need to keep temperature well below 2 degrees. In fact, we need to continue efforts to limit below 1.5 degrees. The temperature goal started reflecting into, and these temperature goals, these mechanisms play important role globally because they are the one which actually guide countries to prepare their national plans as well. It was first time that it was agreed in that 2020 to 2025, in the ongoing period, rich countries must provide $100 billion from 2022 as a flow and amount to be updated in 2025. Next month, I'll be in Bonn, and I think one of the main objective in Bonn negotiation is talk about global stocktake, and finance is one among them. There need to be a collective finance objective that need to be agreed globally, and then this will be distributed among countries. Differentiation, countries must take lead. So there are two set of countries, that's how I see it. One, countries who cause the problem. Second, who are going to cause the problem if they continue to use fossil fuels. And developed countries needed to make sure that the problem they have caused, they rectify it, and they also make sure that those countries who are following their development trajectory, they also deviate to the cleaner pathways. So differentiation is one among them. For example, India never wanted to be seen standing along with US, China, or Australia, or European Union, or Japan, or Canada, because the US, European Union, UK also, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, they all are polluting countries. They are all are polluters. And nobody want to be seen standing along with the culprits. Those who have caused the crime, nobody want to be seen standing in the same box. So differentiation is must, and differentiation need to be applied by capacity, by historic responsibility. I mentioned it earlier also. And this is a very crucial aspect of equity also. The Paris Agreement also says that of course, this Paris Agreement is till 2030. While we are implementing action till 2030, countries also need to prepare a long-term strategies till 2050. And that's where that was part of the Paris Agreement. Burden sharing. Developed countries must provide financial resources, and other countries can provide support on a voluntary basis. So, but this is the differentiation also. Other countries include developing countries, and developed countries are, I mentioned earlier also. Review mechanism. It's not that we will look at the how much we have achieved in 2029 or 2030. There will be a review mechanism which will start from 23 till 25, and then countries will be asked to revise their NDCs again. India has already committed net zero by 2070. Our Prime Minister committed it in Glasgow. India's major 4 emission reduction targets till 2030 are 2.5 to 3 billion tons CO2 equivalent sink. So all the vegetative cover we need to create, it should be able to absorb 2.5 to 3 billion ton of CO2 from the atmosphere. That's first. Second is that countries that our energy intensity will be reduced by almost by 35% by 2030. Our 50% of electricity will come from renewable energy by 2030. So these were objectives that we put on. But then Prime Minister Modi has also committed internally to its own public that while we have given less number globally as a commitment, internally we are committing much more to ourselves. And let's see if that works. And that includes 450 gigawatt of renewable energy to be achieved, added by 2030, from 2022 to 2030. That's a very huge target that India has put forward. Climate change. Vulnerable countries have won recognition of averting, minimizing, and addressing losses suffered due to climate change. Because loss and damage has not been recognized so far. It was in Paris Agreement. It reflected that yes, loss and damage scenario need to be dealt with. And I'll give you some examples of loss and damage. Loss and damage would mean 2 islands that has submerged into Sundarbans. Almost more than 100 households has been shifted from those islands into other islands. That's relocation, but then the permanent losses of those islands are the loss and damage. Similarly, if there is a land on a coastal area and now the salinization is increasing because of high wind velocity, there cannot be any crop yield there, that's permanent loss. How do we relocate farmer who has been cultivating there for ages to other land? Which land we provide? What do we do about this land? So these are the permanent losses. In fact, there was also a situation, and that was of course certainly a political hype. Once Maldives, Maldives, started looking for land outside, its own island in other countries. They said we want to buy land in other countries where we can relocate our people, but because there is going to be permanent losses to our islands, our tourism is affected, and we cannot survive this way. If our islands submerge, where do we move? We cannot live in water. So that way, the questions, and look at the impact of loss and damage, the questions about sovereignty of Maldives arises. Questions about whose passport will they hold? Whose currency will they use? Will a country give a land, sell a land completely to Maldives demarcating it as that country, or will they be part of this the country where they want to buy land? So these are it opens a lot of Pandora's box. There are also non-economic losses like heritage lost, like culture lost. So certainly there is a door in the foot in Paris Agreement where loss and damage is being discussed. This is how in 2016 on 4th November the Paris Agreement was agreed, it was ratified. And let me also tell you, look at the date, 4th November. 7th or 8th November, President Trump was elected. So President Obama made sure before he leaves his office that Paris Agreement comes into force. Of course, US also ratified, and later on President Trump submitted that we want to withdraw from Paris Agreement, which took another 4 years. But by then, President Joe Biden came into power and he withdrew that application. Now, what has resulted into this 30 years of work, 30 years of negotiations? If you look at the above graph, the arrow in orange, dark orange, this is the pre-NDC scenarios. If countries would not have committed GHG emissions reductions, then the temperature, then it would have gone like this. So the reduction has been able to bend it here, not much, marginal, but significant. Now it need to go much. This graph need to bend much below in terms of greenhouses being emitted in the atmosphere. In fact, it should start negative by 2050. 1.5 scenario is green and blue is 2 degree temperature scenario. And look at the heat wave now in North India. We are expecting 46, 47 degree temperature tomorrow in Delhi. And that's very unprecedented. Now, look, this is when global average temperature rise is 1.2 degree. If it goes to 3 degree or 4 degree, imagine the kind of heat we are going to face or intensity of cyclones we are going to face. So that's what the negotiation have been achieved. The road from Rio to Glasgow has been able to achieve. Last year, Glasgow COP was more about finalizing the carbon market mechanisms for Paris Agreement, and now the implementation has started. Now, this is how it looks like in future from now till 2025, 3 years after that. 2016, forget about all the above terms. I just took this graphic to show you the year. 2016, Paris Agreement has been ratified. 17, 18, 19, 20, even 21 was to prepare a rule book. That means how the countries need to report back on their commitments, how the market mechanisms will work, how they will be monitored, how the finance will flow, how the additional finance will be mobilized, all that. And from next year, the global stocktake starts till 2025, when countries will be asked to revise. Because as of now, if we combined all the greenhouse gas emission reductions by countries, we are still heading somewhere around 3 degree temperature goal, and we need to bring it to 1.5 degree. So countries need to commit much more than what they have committed. The fact that everyone has given this time to countries to start implementing, because everybody is hopeful by 2024, countries will realize that implementing climate action is much easier than what they are thinking, and will give them a lot of confidence. And there will be a lot of investment into energy sector also, renewable energy sector also, that will give them confidence, and that may encourage them to commit much more. India on climate agenda at home. How much time I have, Dr.
Another 10 minutes, sir.
Okay, sure. That's fine. Thank you very much. So India on climate agenda at home, despite its low per capita GHG. So India's per capita GHG emissions is only 2.1 ton per year, not much. But then also remember, within India, there is rich class, there are poor class. So that way there's a huge difference. So we certainly need to start working on ensuring that our rich reduce their carbon footprint and poor doesn't increase their carbon footprint. India is the 4th largest GHG emitter in the world. Why so disparity? Low per capita, but still 4th largest. emitter because we are second largest society in the world. So even if we, so I normally consider emissions into two categories. One is survival emissions and one is luxury emissions. If we total the survival emissions 2 tons, then also cumulatively our per annual emissions will be much higher, 1.44 billion compared to 300 million people in US. So just to give you a comparison, US per capita emissions are almost around 25 tons per person per year. India is 2 tons per person per year. China is now 9 tons per year per person. India is 2 tons, Germany 11 tons per year per person. So these are the disparities we are looking at, developed and developed countries. It is a lower middle income country and the only emerging economy in that country group. When I say country group, that means G20 country groups. It's one of the emerging economy, and it has charted an ambitious climate agenda in the form. So this is, for example, 20 to 25% carbon intensity by 2022, and I should have added by 2023, 35% carbon emission intensity reduction. So India, this is what India has committed. 175 gigawatt to renewable energy by 2022. This year, we are somewhere around 90 gigawatt already, but 450 gigawatt by 2030 is our target. 10,000 gigawatts energy saving through energy efficiency. That's part of a solar plan also, creating natural sinks through afforestation. What are the challenges that need to be addressed? Upgrade of obsolete technologies like grids that can receive energy from diverse sources. As of now, the technology is such that it can receive energy from hydro and from thermal. What about smart metering in urban areas? If I want to install a rooftop solar and I'm not at home, not using, and my rooftop is generating electricity, can it go back into the grid? So smart metering, and that's why grids need to be compatible. Similarly, if there is a farmer who want to, on the coastal area, want to install 2 wind turbines and want to sell electricity as additional income and also want to contribute into energy security, can our grid accept it? No. When the grids are shut down, that energy goes waste. So there are a lot of technological upgrades that are required. Technological solutions like smart metering that can encourage entrepreneurs in promotion of renewable energy, changing the mindset of consumers. I remember when I started working on climate change in 2002, first question that came to my mind is, oh, now we will stop getting electricity from wires. We need to have solar panels on rooftop, that we will not have rooftop and we have to clean it every day. That's a non-starter for a consumer. And that's why that's not the case. Technology has improved. They are more advanced, and we need to inform consumers about it. Investments into clean source of energy, and for which even policies need to be welcoming investment. As of now, there are a lot of barriers here. Energy transition from fossil fuel-based infrastructure to renewable energy-based without compromising our growth and development. That's the key. We do not want our economic growth percentage to go down, and we want to move from one energy infrastructure to advanced energy infrastructure for future without affecting our growth. We do not want that our effort for no poverty are reduced because of transition. We do not want house needs are compromised because of transition. We do not want nutrition becomes an issue among our poor population because of transition. We want all that to go along. So threat running against time, temperature. Ipcc has already said it's almost 10 years or 8 years now actually. NDC enhancement is priority, and it was agreed in COP24, again reiterated in COP26. Public finance has not delivered the quantum of finance, and I'll come on why. I think that what are the lessons, and that will be my last slide. New, additional, predictable, and sustainable is perceived in the context of historical responsibility. There has to be new money. There has to be additional money. It should be predicted. I should know how much money is going to come in next 5 or 10 years. And it should be sustainable also. It should not go up and down. I remember that many of the developed countries who are investing into developing countries now, they are planning to reduce the money now because they want to invest in Ukraine because of war efforts. Now, that's not sustainable. So certainly, we need sustainability here. And polluters should pay. If we fail new and additional, then we will be ending up buying geoengineering technologies in overshoot scenarios. Let me share my lessons learned. Unfortunately, the first lesson is from Rio till Glasgow, we have engaged culprits in making law. Developed countries are responsible for causing this problem, and they have been involved in decision making. Basically, they are part of the negotiations to decide how they should be punished. And they, of course, culprits will never let law take its shape, and that's why the 30 years process. The process has been slow, but then the co-benefit of the climate negotiations or climate talks has been that within countries, countries has been working on national policies now everywhere. India, National Action Plan, State Action Plan, District Climate Action Plan, missions, National Adaptation Fund. So much has come because India has to, show how progressive they are, and India has been working very, aggressively in taking up its own responsibility. In fact, as of now, what India has committed much more than its own fair share. Global climate talks add to momentum, but India needs to be self-sufficient in taking action. If we are waiting for money to come from developed countries, no, it's not going to come. It will be very less money. We have to learn to generate our own money because our survival is at stake. Climate impacts like cyclones, Cyclone Asani impacting Bay of Bengal, drought, floods, see what has happened in Kerala. So all that affects our, whatever the developmental gain we make, it gets washed away. So it's our survival. If there is no money coming from developed countries, we can hold them, we can blame them, but it's us who are suffering. So we need to build our own resilience. We need to fund action on ground. Transition for energy security is important, and we need to reduce our dependence from fossil fuel, which has been around 125 billion of bill last year. We are importing from outside. It is in our interest to save this money that can be used for health, that can be used for sustainable agriculture, that can be used for infrastructure building, etc. So, transition for energy, all that we have to do it on our own. Nobody is coming to our help. Let me tell you that. Global climate finance or trade advantage. Even if there is a global climate finance that's going to come from bilateral sources, there will be some quid and pro to give them some trade advantages. And remember, nothing is free. If you think that you're getting something free, I mean, there's been saying you are the product. So here, our trade advantage will be compromised if we rely totally ourselves into global climate finance. We should take money, but we should also hold our ground on self-sufficiency, and that's the key. Energy transition and opportunity, not a burden. The fact that we are going to move from fossil fuel to renewable energy soon, it's not a burden. It's not that we have to do it because global community has asked. It's an opportunity. If we do it faster, we can start selling technology outside to others. We can start selling, models to others, and we can be front runner into making sure how energy security from renewable energy has been done. So far, Germany has been one of the lead in energy transition. Economic value triggers real action. For example, what is the economic value of a forest? Or if we say that what is today, when we communicate to people that climate change is coming and so many people will die, that's fine. But the day we tell them that so much percentage of GDP has gone down, and this has been the economic losses, people understand its gravity, and then the real action. So that has been my learning. Economic value triggers real action, even if it is not seen in an economic manner, but always try to show it. It's easy to communicate, honestly. Developing countries are different, and this is one in the context of agriculture sector. Dr. Govda mentioned about small and marginal farmers and adaptation needs. In the climate negotiations, when the two set of countries meet, developed and developing countries, there has been fight. There has not been any, legal agreement on agriculture. And why? Because developed countries see agriculture as source of emissions. Developing countries see this as a vulnerable sector because they are small and marginal farmers. While developed countries do not have small and marginal farmers, they are all industrialized big farmers. They use mechanized farming, and that's why their emission carbon footprint is much higher. Both the methane because of cultivation, or nitrous oxide because of excess use of fertilizer, but also the energy used within that sector. While in India, the small and marginal farmers are not dependent so much on energy use, and then also their dependence on fertilizer is limited. And that's why agriculture has been one. And in fact, we have done a paper, role of agriculture in climate change. I can share that with you all. Please go through it. Certainly, developed and developing country perspectives are different, and sometimes it leads to confrontation and disagreement in the global discourse. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Sanjay Vashisht. It has been a wonderful account of journey that has happened from Rio to Glasgow.
Yes.
And we really wonder how the survival emissions and the luxury emissions are going to contribute and how we are going to control them. And in fact, the difference in the kind of emissions that are coming with the developed and developing countries, 2 to 25 tons, it's a huge, but somehow who will pay for it is also an issue. One question quickly, there is in the chat box. It says, Shailendra Kumar has asked, most global climate funding is still focused on mitigation, very little on adaptation. Moreover, major part of these climate funds are given as loans. That defeats the purpose. What do you suggest to Government of India and other developing countries and other actors to enable the access to climate funds meaningfully?
Green Climate Fund, which with headquarters in Seoul, their commitment is 50% money will go to adaptation and 50% to mitigation. That's one. And they are not facilitating loan. If you reach out to JICA, Japan Corporation, then of course they give loan. GIZ money is not loan. Hello? GIZ,
please go ahead.
German corporation is not loan. There has been a deal between India and Germany recently about 10 billion euros by 2030 to help India reach net zero, which has combination of both soft loans, but then also the funding. So adaptation is receiving money for sure. Let me also tell you, 400 crore has been earmarked in the national adaptation within India. This is a national adaptation fund administered by Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change. It has triggered a lot of action on ground. State action plan implementation is being done through them. Globally, the adaptation money is coming from IDRC, Canada. No loan, it's a grant. Green Climate Fund for sure. There is a Unfccc adaptation fund which gives money, which has so far a limit of $10 million US per project per country. That's it. But we are hoping once the Paris Agreement implementation starts and this carbon market starts, there is a levy that will start, filling in the coffers of adaptation fund, and there'll be more money flowing in. There are loans, but ADB gives loan, the World Bank gives loan, and that's where we need to negotiate hard for sure.
Yeah, one last question.
Ji.
Focus on CDM was on reduction in emission and not much on carbon sequestration. So do you think this trend continues now also? What is the level of focus in creating and maintaining carbon sinks, forests in particular?
Yeah, so CDM focus was actually on emission reductions, how much your project reduces emissions. Natural sink or maintaining natural sink was being discussed there as in the RED Plus as a possibility, but it didn't materialize in CDM. But it's going to be there in the new clean development mechanism, because many countries have committed maintaining sinks or increasing the sink also, and that's where it's going to reflect. I'm sure, but the biggest lacuna in methodology of sink is today, if a country gives money to let's say India and says you need to maintain this much sink, we'll pay you this much every year at the rate of so and so carbon credits. The problem is what happens when there is a fire outbreak in the forest, whether India will return the money back because they failed to protect it, or because that all captured carbon will go into atmosphere. So that's where methodology gap is there, and everybody is trying to work on it. There is no target for methane emissions. The methane emission is normally CH4 is normally converted into carbon dioxide equivalent, and that's when countries are committing how much they will.
Yeah. So thank you very much, Sanjay Vashisht. I think now we are hard pressed for time. Probably we will be connecting back to you. Maybe we can discuss in length on a special session on this particular discussions.
Sure,
and when we prepare the action plan, probably your advice and guidance should be of
always
great help.
always happy
So
to.
thank you very much for your
Thank
time.
you.
We really
Thank you.
appreciate, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Ilangon. So next lecture is from Dr. Prabhakar, the Intergovernmental Panel Reports on Climate Change and Points for Plan of Actions. Srividya, you can introduce Dr. Prabhakar.
Yes, sir. Good morning, sir. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's a pleasure for us to have on board Dr. Prabhakar, Principal Scientist Entomology from CRIDA, Hyderabad, for a session on IPCC reports on climate change and points for plans of actions. Dr. Prabhakar has obtained his graduation and post-graduation from Andhra Pradesh Agriculture University and his doctorate in entomology from IRA, New Delhi. His key areas of interest are climate change in agriculture, remote sensing of crop stress, developing decision support systems for crop stress management. And Dr. Prabhakar has vast experience, around 25 years of research experience in ICR, and he is currently leading the National Innovations in Climate Resilience Agriculture program, which is a flagship network project of ICR, which is implemented across the country. He has to his credit several research publications, both national and international, and has authored and edited several books. And he is the visiting scholar of Oklahoma State University, USA, fellow of Royal Entomological Society, and fellow of several other prestigious societies. And Dr. Prabhakar is also the recipient of many science awards, both national and international. To name a few, he is the recipient of Young Scientist Award by DST, Best Scientist Award by Pearl Foundation, and Outstanding Agriculture Scientist by B.V. David Foundation. He has been deputed by Government of India to represent in several international fora like SAARC, G20, Quad, IPCC, UNEP, etc., which are related to climate resilient agriculture. So I welcome you, sir. The platform is yours.
Thank you, Vidya. And also I thank the CAPA and Dr. Thonapi and all other senior colleagues. Good morning, everyone. I'll be sharing my thoughts on IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Dr. Sanjay, before me, he just gave a beautiful narration of UNFCCC, starting from Rio to Glasgow. It was a bit very nice to hear to him. And IPCC is a part of it, part of commitment in UNFCCC. And I would like to give you a brief of how this IPCC is playing key role in climate change in general and in particular to agriculture sector. I would like to briefly introduce the IPCC process as such, its functions, and how it contributing to climate science and policy making. Then there's reports, because IPCC gives the several major mandate of IPCC is to produce reports. There are several kinds of reports, though we will not be dealing with many other reports. The recent one, which has been referred in the morning, the IPCC 6th assessment report, is called AR6 in short, and it has 3 parts, working group 1, 2, and 3. So we will see what are the major take messages from these reports specific to agriculture sector. And then I also have happened to attend, as Dr. Tonto was mentioning, I had an opportunity to visit COP26 as a part of Indian delegation. I will share one couple of slides what happened there in specific to agriculture sector. Now the brief of the IPCCs, as Dr. Sanjay said, it all started in 1988, the establishment of IPCC jointly by World Meteorological Organization and United Nations. and then it started its functions actually from 1990 onwards. So as I said before, the major purpose of Ipcc is to bring science of climate change to the growing for bringing public awareness, and also involving several stakeholders, not only government sector, including several stakeholders. The basis for this is peer-reviewed literature. So this report, this is a cycle, the cycle of 5 to 6 years. It will continue, as I said, it will start from 1990, and then now it's sixth cycle is going on. It's called AR6. So we will see what are those reports and what are those important messages in these cycles. Now, before going to that, how Ipcc prepares the reports, just to bring to your notice, because it has a very comprehensive system and also a detailed methodology to prepare a report, because it's a global report. Unless there's an agreement between the parties, this report will not be accepted. So that's why it starts with a scoping workshop when the start of the cycle. Then it approves outlines. The panel then approves. There is a separate panel. It approves the outline. Once outline is approved, nominations for authors are invited from different governments. There will be a bureau who selects these authors. Once these authors are selected, then they will start preparing the draft, first draft. This first draft will be circulated to the government departments for their comments. They'll go for second draft. Second draft again will be circulated to all the government departments and other stakeholders, and they will take the reviews and try to revise it twice. Then finally, this summary for policymakers, that's the synthesis of these reports, will be presented before the governments for their review. Critical review will be done. Once it is completed, the report is ready for release. This is how the process of Ipcc report goes on. Now, let us start with the latest reports. In addition to assessment reports, Ipcc also publishes certain special reports. You can see the recent reports just showing here. One is global warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade, where the science of how the 1.5 degrees centigrade has been arrived at this 1.5 degrees centigrade, and how to curtail the temperatures to 1.5, probability of shooting the temperature beyond 1.5. All these things have been discussed. The second important report was climate change and land, which is relevant to agriculture sector, where the detailed report based on the scientific evidences on the impact of climate change on desertification, land degradation, sustainable land management, food security, and more importantly, greenhouse gas fluxes. This has been documented and presented in this report. The third report is a special report on ocean cryosphere, though it's not directly relevant to agriculture sector, but it mostly deals with the Arctic ice melting and how it impacts the monsoon cycles, which indirectly affects the agriculture sector. Now, there is another important report was the guidelines for greenhouse gas inventories, because there was one publication earlier in, I think, 2000, early 2000s. Now this has been refined now, because as the technology changes, the methodology for emissions is also have been revised. The main purpose of this is to make a common methodology so that all the member countries will follow, and the reporting will be uniform across the countries. That is the purpose. It includes these emissions from terrestrial ecosystems as well. Now, coming to the assessment report, which is the main report of Ipcc. As I said, the sixth cycle. And also I said there are three parts of this report beyond synthesis report. So the purpose of this report is to say in simple terms, to bring out the state of the scientific knowledge and also the socio-economic knowledge on the impact of climate change, and also not only current impacts, how it's going to impact in the future. It could be 20 years, mid-century or late century or early century. And finally, this report also provides us the how to reduce the climate change impacts. It could be by reducing emissions or sequestering the carbon. So different options have been provided. And the more important point I would like to say is a global report. It cannot be because since the content of this report is it gives us some directions, but at the same time it also gives some flair of the regional context to it. This regional context is brought for the first time in AR6. Earlier it was not there. Now they have made now, if not country-wise, region-wise. For example, South Asia, Southeast Asia, North America, like that. They have provided a separate chapter for that. So these are the 3 reports. As you can see, the dates starting from 2021 August. Latest one was 4th April 2020, a couple of months back. Now, what are the take-home messages in these 3 reports? Let us see one by one. The first one is physical science basis. You can see here clearly it is the evidence is very clear for different phenomena. For example, carbon dioxide concentration is the highest so far in 2 million years. What we have 410 ppm, which has been said based on scientific evidence, it is one of the highest in the 2 million years period. Sea level rise again is rising at a very alarming rate, taking 3,000 years of study into consideration. You can see at the bottom the recent 3-decadal period increase in sea level rise. For example, 1900 to 1971, 70 years period, the increase was 1.3 mm per year. Later on, 71 to 2006, 1.9. Now the latest one, 3.7 mm per year. Is a very, very alarming. So this is a cause of concern not only for the islands but also for agriculture, more so for India because we have long sea coast. Arctic ice and the glacier retreat is a major issue which has been discussed in earlier reports as well, and now it has been conclusively said that this is the unprecedented over the past 100 to 2000 years based on several model studies. Now, what the report says about the temperatures, how temperature is shooting up in the past, for example, from 1850 onwards to 2020, the last year. And they compare it with the last 2000 years. This graph, 2000 years, that is the increase in temperature is not much. It's hovering around 0.5 degrees centigrade up and down. But it's all started with 1850. You're all aware of this. And the rate at which it is increasing from 1850 onwards is shown in the right side box picture. You can see here the simulated temperatures from 1850 without human intervention, okay, and with human intervention, and also the natural without any GHG emissions. What is supposed to be the levels of these temperatures? It's very clear from this is all because of the anthropogenic factors. The temperature rise is observed. Now, different models have been projected to see how it's going to the temperature is going to be there at least up to 2050. The SSPs are economic pathways. Here you can SSP2 is we can say it's one of the more realistic, or if you go to SSP3, it's a higher emission sites. So in any case, as in the morning the previous speaker said, it's more certain that we are going to touch 1.5 degrees centigrade by 2050. We're already at 1.11 now. It's more certain at 1.5. Now all the efforts are to curtail it below 2 degrees centigrade by by end of the century. So that's how this report gives us the information. Now, how this temperature is data is across the globe. You can see here at 1 degree centigrade, the global observed and simulated temperatures is almost the same. The point here is the land surfaces are warming up more than the ocean surfaces. So that's one message across the globe. And then the next level, 1.5, 2 degrees centigrade, 4 degrees centigrade. You can see the more red is the warming will be very higher. You can also see the temperature warming is more towards Arctic regions, and then less towards the south of the southern part of it. And however, most of the countries are going to experience the global warming at different simulated conditions. Now coming to rainfall, the other important factor which can be simulated is rainfall. You can see here.
Who would you like to call?
Hello. Hello. Yeah. At one again, it is presented 1.5, 2 degrees centigrade, 4 degrees centigrade. How the rainfall is going to change. The message here is the.
Sorry, I'm having trouble with the connection. Please try again in a moment.
Hello. Hello.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. There's some disturbance. Okay. The message in this graph is there is an increase in temperature in high altitudes, equatorial regions, and parts of monsoon regions. At the same time, there will be decrease in temperature and the parts of many subtropical and tropical regions. So you can see the India is going to have more rains compared to the other parts of the regions in the surrounding areas. And the bottom image gives us the information on the soil moisture availability, which is relevant to agriculture. This again derived from the rainfall. You can see here the South Asia and the North Africa, East Asia is going to have high moisture availability for agriculture, and other regions, North America, Europe, and also Australia, New Zealand, southern part of Africa are going to suffer by moisture deficit. Now, second part of the report was on impacts, adaptation, and vulnerability. And there is clear indications that there will be increase in heat and drought, which is going to affect not only the crops and also the in agriculture sector, at least the workers. It is also projected in this report their efficiency is going to come down, and also the crop yields are going to come down, and all it leads to reduced household income, increase food prices, both local and global level. And then the climate risks, as I said, heat stress exposed to heat waves continues to increase in the years to come. Water scarcity, and one statement provided is at 2 degrees centigrade, regions relying on snowmelt is going to experience more water shortage compared to the monsoon-dependent regions. Food security already mentioned, and flood. The events of tropical cyclones are going to be more in the years to come. And then the food security aspect, how to deal with the global warming and its impacts. First one is cultivar improvement, which all of us have been working on it. Agroforestry has been proposed because it has a lot of sequestration potential, and diversification at farm and landscape level. Instead of growing for monocropping, go for diversified cropping. And then all the approaches should be on a community based. And the biodiversity was given a lot of importance in this report compared to the previous reports. And all these benefits on a large scale is addressing food security, health, well-being, and livelihoods of the community throughout the globe. The last part is mitigation. As you can see here in this graph, different greenhouse gases, it has been projected here. Their percent increase compared to 1990 to 2019. All the gases, including methane, nitrous oxide, maybe the percentage may vary, but they're all increasing in the past 2 to 3 decades. Now, region-wise, I was mentioning in the couple of minutes back, which region is contributing more to GHG emissions. This particular picture, it was projections are shown here from 1990 to 2090 onwards. You can see here the Eastern Asia, that means including China, the emissions from 1990 to compared to 2090 is increased. 13% 1990. Now it's almost 27%. North America, of course, a little bit less, 18%. Now it's 12%. The rest all countries, because of implementation of their NDCs, the percent emissions are coming down, including South Asia. However, the total GHG emissions in terms of volume, it is increasing. Now, if you see the other side of the coin is the historical emissions. Because comparing with 1990, it gives a different picture. And if you compare with historical emissions starting from 1850 onwards, it gives totally a different picture. You can see here the different regions, not country-wise, region-wise, the contribution of GHG emissions by these regions. North America contributes 3% of emissions so far, followed by Europe 16%, Eastern Asia, mostly China 12%. All other countries are less than 10%. South Asia, one of the lowest, including India, is only 4%. Now, Sanjay was talking about the per capita income. Yes, South Asia is the lowest. It's around 2.5 to 3 tons per capita. And the North America is the highest. It's around nearing 20. Then followed by Australia, Japan, New Zealand is one group. European group is the other group. So this is now this kind of analysis gives us the argument for common for differential responsibility, which has been deliberated in detail in the climate change negotiations. Now, the emissions scenarios with and without implementation of NDCs. Sanjay was making a mention about this. Same thing I am presenting here. You can see here the red color graph by 2000 now 2030 onwards. The emissions are going to peak if you don't take additional commitments other than what you have committed. But if you make additional commitments, in another 10 years period, the emissions are going to come down. So that is the message from this point and from this analysis. Now, the land use patterns, since agriculture sector not only a source is also a sink, so that way the sector has a specific advantage. And now a lot of emphasis has been provided in these reports for protecting and restoring natural ecosystems because it sequesters a lot of carbon. It could be peatlands, coastlands, savannas, or grasslands. So this is the one point they have made it very clear. And then they clearly mentioned that it cannot compensate for any delayed emissions from other sectors. So agriculture sector, that way, though it's not contributing much, but still it plays a key role in global climate change. Now, how the whatever practices we in agriculture sector is contributing towards sustainable development goals. You are all aware there are 17 SDGs, and we will see how whatever actions we take, could be mitigation, adaptation, they are addressing these goals. I have this report listed some 7 to 8 mitigation options. Most of them are addressing one or the other sustainable development goals except goal number 4, 5, and 17. Which are not specific to agriculture sector, but the list of mitigation options provided here are very, very important and are going to play a key role in planning our agriculture policies in the years to come. Now, what are the key messages we can take home from these Ipcc reports? Now, it is very very clear that there's mean temperatures will be going to rise. It's more so in the northern part of India and also hilly regions, the impact will be very higher. Rainfall, though the total rainfall is high, but the intensity varies and its distribution. This is very, very crucial for agriculture crops. Sea level rise, as said, it causes a lot of seawater intrusion, makes the soil saline. It has direct impacts on agriculture sector. Extreme other events, it could be drought, cyclone, flood, hailstorms of late for the past 15-20 years. We are having hailstorms. Earlier, we don't have. Heat waves, we have seen last month, April, Indo-Gangetic plains, almost 6 million ton yield is projected to be reduced. So now all these things will be a recurring phenomena. Now, we have several options. We are already working on many of them, but it's not enough. For example, climate resilient varieties, many of the crop institutes, including IMR, it's one of the mandate for the institutes. But the approach, earlier we used to develop a variety to particular trait, or it could be a drought, or it could be pest tolerance. Now the time has come to go for multiple stresses. I know it's very difficult, but it's challenging. That's the need of the hour now. And there are certain facilities, which is, if you can have it, for example, rainwater shelters and speed breeding facilities. I wish every crop institute will have it, so that we can generate the advance the generations and bring out the varieties in a short period. Besides this, we all know we'll be getting a high amount of rainfall. We need to harvest this excess amount of rainfall and then try the means and ways to use it to increase the cropping intensity in the second season, that is Rabi season. Besides this, climate change research will be a continuous aspect, because still we don't have a fairly an understanding of many other crops which we grow. Except for major crops, many other crops we are still have to have understanding of these crops, how they behave to climate change. Morning, Dr. Jacqueline was mentioning about pests and diseases. Yes, it's a concern for us. New pests are emerging, and their intensity, their spread is increasing. And there is a need to go for a climate smart farm machinery by using renewable energy resources. Also, the drones. Now, Government of India is giving a lot of importance for drones. As of now, we are using drones only for pesticide sprays, but a lot of things can be done with these drones, particularly if you go for imaging and then damage assessment during extreme events. Otherwise, traditionally, if there is a cyclone or hailstorm, it takes months together, sometimes years together, to pay the compensation. With these drones, the technology, maybe within weeks or a couple of weeks, we can enumerate and then provide the information to the respective governments, so that the relief can be very fast. Livestock and fisheries, important sectors. They are very vulnerable. It is very important to develop resilient systems in these factors also. Now, emissions, there is a lot of talk about emissions in these reports. But as far as India point of view, emissions, we are many of our schemes and projects are aimed at reducing emissions, but we have not made any commitments from this sector because of several reasons. And then there is also advocacy to increase the soil organic carbon content and use of biochar on large scale for soil amendment. Again, in view of a lot of uncertainties in Indian context, there is not much agreement on upscaling these two technologies, though they are very important, but without any commitment. We are doing it, but without any commitment. And then irrigation. There is another peculiar situation was there, where the irrigation was shown as a potential source of global warming. There is a report, our own colleagues, they have published one paper, where the Indo-Gangetic plains, the regular irrigation over the years is caused shifting of monsoon. So such kind of things have been negotiated, and it was not made part of this report because of our interventions from India and many other developing countries. So instead of that, we said that we highlight the positive impact of irrigation because it's a food security and reducing vulnerability. So that way it was dropped from the report. Adaptation and co-benefits of adaptation is our focus, but not mitigation. It has been told time and again. And again, this year also in the Ipcc negotiations, where I am also part of in this process, this has been brought out very clearly. And then, as I said, mitigation, we don't, though we do it under several national schemes without any commitment. So this again, a point to consider. And then upscaling resilient technologies, we have been doing it and we will continue to do it. And the latest announcement by the Prime Minister in the COP26, net zero by 2070. Now here the question has come whether to bring agriculture sector into NDC. So once you bring it to NDC, then it becomes a commitment. So it is a point of, because the agriculture sector is highly sensitive to both political and economical space, it needs further deliberations whether to bring it to NDC or not. Future climate change research, as per my understanding in these negotiations, I think we should undertake more of metadata analysis. We have been publishing in bits and pieces from several locations. Unless somebody does a meta-analysis on studying the impact of climate change and agriculture on a regional scale, Otherwise, such kind of bits and pieces are not considered as a reference in IPCC reports because they're all refers to a small location. So this is our first priority. And the impact of adaptation mitigation practices and GH emission should be done at landscape level. We have been doing it maybe a plot level or farmer's field level. It should be done at landscaping level. It could be through modeling or through actual measurements. That has to be done. And more importantly, mapping of schemes, because Government of India, particularly Ministry of Agriculture, implementing several schemes under NMSA. But majority of the schemes are not mapped in terms of their ability to mitigate or reduce the emissions or adaptation benefits. That angle it has been not assessed. So now we need to assess this. Food losses, mention has been made. That is still an area of concern for us. And other important thing is we as a scientist are very eager to publish negative impacts of climate change because it will be easily published. But there's other angle to it, positive impacts. If you can have a proper analysis and thought, it can be brought out. We are attempting, for example, I'll tell you, in Himalayan regions, there will be added advantage for maize cultivation because of high temperatures. So we need to collect data and try to publish it. So that's kind of information. So now we have to work in that directions. Of course, capacity building on cutting edge climate change research tools, particularly to the middle and the young career scientists, is important in my opinion. So last couple of slides, as mentioned earlier, I had an opportunity to be part of this COP26 at Glasgow, and I participated in two negotiation groups. One is agriculture. It's called Coronary Joint Work on Agriculture, and also loss and damage. It's indirectly related to agriculture sector. So I have seen the commitments from many nations in this COP26. I have listed some of them here, including the developing country like Brazil, for example. See, they have committed to reduce the emissions by 1 billion tons. Of course, other Germany, UK, European Unions, USA, and you can see the numbers. UK, 75% of the farmers will be converted to low carbon practices. European Union, carbon farming initiative, lot of schemes have been initiated. United States, one of the highest commitment of $3 million and 55% emissions reductions by 2030. It's a huge commitment. And then you can see here at the bottom the different initiatives undertaken by USDA the past 1 or 2 years. Now, as India, representative from India, we don't have such kind of commitments, but still we highlighted whatever ongoing programs that are towards climate resilience. It's MSA, it could be organic farming, bamboo mission, or including our ICR, known ICR project, NICRA, which has huge impacts. This we highlighted in this negotiation process. Now, there are certain sticky points which needs consideration. One is emissions from livestock, which has been came for negotiation time and again, which we try to avoid, or we try to not agree upon it. As told in the morning, livestock is one of the highest GHG emission contributor from India. It's around 54%, and our population is growing at the rate of 4.6% every 5 years. So, and productivity compared to the developed nations, our per animal productivity is very less. But at the same time, we cannot. It is very difficult to decrease the emissions from livestock based on the whatever technologies we have. So that's why it's a very sensitive issue. It is not agreed upon. Other important aspect was our fertilizer use efficiency is one of the lowest in the world, India's. The recent report, Sustainable Nitrogen Management Index, ranked India is 108 rank out of 180 countries. There is another report, Environmental Performance Index. India is still ranked very poor, 168 of 180. Of course, the EPA is mostly for air quality control, but there also the nutrient efficiency has also been brought in the report. There is a discussion about methane. It's one of the GHG emissions. There is a proposal to reduce these emissions by 30% by 2030 onwards. This initiative by United States and EU. And again, for a country like India, it's difficult to achieve. From agriculture sector, overall, we can think of from agriculture sector, once you say methane, it's targeting to paddy and livestock. So we said agriculture sector per se is not included. Overall, from natural gases, we will do it. And as Dr. Sanjay was mentioning, there is a lot of scope for international funding. It could be GCF, GF, Adaptation Fund. There are now it's opening up, including for adaptation. Now the emphasis was for including for adaptation. Now to re-emphasize India's position, since our commitment, 2020 commitment is economy-wise reductions, not sector-wise or GHG gas-wise reduction emissions. We stick on to this in this COP also. And our strength is the emissions per hectare or per ton of food grains is still one of the lowest in the world. We can say India is in 9th position out of 180 countries. So this was our argument put forth to support the emissions part. Said we still will committed to work towards resilient agriculture through our schemes and projects. Thank you for your time, and I once again thank Kappa and Dr. Thonapi for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Prabhakar. Very enlightening, and real course of action now should be preparedness, as you have really pointed out. So adaptation, mitigation, preparedness for future. So I think we will discuss in length probably on these issues and document together and to put together a policy paper. So thank you very much, and very, very excited to have you here, and everybody is benefited.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So thank you very much. Now we will go to next session, which is the impact of climate change on agriculture and horticulture, taking them together. We have very eminent personalities, Dr. C.L. Lakshmipati Gowda, former Deputy Director General Ipcc, speaking on climate change and sustainable agriculture and adaptation strategies. Then after that, Dr. N. Krishna Kumar, former Deputy Director General Horticulture, ICAR, and also the former Regional Representative South and Central Asia, Biodiversity International. So now I would like to invite Dr. Lakshmipati Gowda, sir. Before that, Dr. Swarna will be introducing our honorable speaker, Dr. Lakshmipati Gowda. Swarna.
Yes, sir. So it is a great honor to introduce Dr. Lakshmipati Gowda, who was the former Deputy Director General Research at Ipcc, Hyderabad. He earlier worked at Ipcc as Director Grain Legumes Research Program and Director of Crop Improvement Program. He was also the coordinator of the Cereals and Legumes Asia Network and worked with 12 Asian countries to strengthen the capacity of the national programs. He worked as a consultant to NAS in Bangladesh, China, Indonesia, Nepal, and Vietnam. He is instrumental.
Go ahead, Swarna.
Hello, am I audible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Okay. It is a great honor to introduce Dr. Lakshmipati Gowda, who was the former Deputy Director General Research at Ipcc, Hyderabad. He earlier worked at Ipcc as Director Grain Legumes Research Program and Director of Crop Improvement Program. He was also the coordinator of the Cereals and Legumes Asia Network and worked with 12 Asian countries to strengthen the capacity of the national programs. He worked as a consultant to NAS in Bangladesh, China, Indonesia, Nepal, and Vietnam. He is instrumental in release of more than 70 high-yielding chickpea varieties in 30 countries that have made significant impacts in farmers' fields. He received more than 30 awards, honors, and recognitions from various countries across the world. He traveled more than 40 countries and has a credit of more than 360 publications. He is currently one of the co-founder of the GRSV Consulting Services, which provides consultancy support to institutions and individuals in areas related to agricultural research and development. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Swarna. So let me try to share my presentation.
Sir, do you want me to share from here?
Is it visible now, Dr. Elangovan?
Not yet come, sir.
It is on my screen.
Shall I do it from here, sir?
I only hope it doesn't. Okay, let me.
I can do it from here, sir.
Okay.
Elangovan, you can share.
Sir.
Okay. So can you make it?
I am sharing the slides, sir. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay. So maybe you can make it full screen, Dr. Elangovan.
I made it, sir.
Right. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak briefly on the adaptation strategies for agriculture. Next, please. As we all know, the biggest global challenge is looming. Is one of them, land degradation, loss of biodiversity, the crisis for energy and food, and of course, the population explosion. All these put together are creating what we call the looming perfect storm. In addition to this is the Ukraine-Russia conflict that is also making life much more difficult. Next one, please. As many speakers before me have informed, global warming is truly there. And as you can see, the warming trends since 1979, the warming at the surface, except in the Eastern Pacific and the Southern Ocean and parts of Antarctica, is there. So land warming is significantly faster than the ocean in the last 20 years. And the mid-troposphere warming is consistent with that at the surface. Next one, please. Earth currently is about 1 degree. It was 0.98 in 2020, so extrapolated that it could be around 1 degree Celsius warmer than 1860. Drought is increasing. Next one. And we expect that there will be more severe droughts, as you can see, compared to the decadal trend from 2000 to 246, and then look at 2050 to 2096. So there is an increasing trend towards more severe droughts. Next one, please. And again, the both physical as well as the economic scarcity of water. What I mean, water scarcity is that water may be available, but then people don't have the capacity to buy that water for their use, either personal use or for other purposes, including agriculture. Next one, please. And an additional disadvantage for agriculture is that climate change is reducing the length of the growing season. As you can see in the African continent, on to my left, the length of growing period between 2000 to 2050 compared to the one on the right with two different models, you can see that the duration of the growing season is definitely reducing, and this is leading to reduction in crop yields in many African countries, up to 50%, and then up to 30% in both Central and South Asia. Next one. And again, as Dr. Prabhakar mentioned, the concentration of CO2, I think his is the latest, so it's around 400 ppm currently, as against much lower levels in the many years before. Next one, please. If you look at the vulnerability of Asian agriculture to climate change, as you can see here, except in the Central Asia and the Tibetan Plateau, all other areas in Central Asia, in the temperate Asia, and also in the tropical Asia, both South and Southeast Asia, all the three areas in terms of food and fiber production, the water resources, and the coastal ecosystems are listed as highly vulnerable to climate change. Next one. In terms of the other two, including Dr. Jackie Hughes, all the three presentations did mention about the effects of climate change on crop yields. This is the kind of broad brush picture of what will happen by 2080. And as you can see, most countries, there is going to be potential change in the yield of cereals by the next 3 to 4 decades. Next one, please. There was a study done at Ipcc. This is old data, but what I want to emphasize here is that among the Ipcc crops, because of increase in the carbon dioxide, the yield may be on the positive side of increase, but by increased temperature, the yield is going to reduce, and then on the right hand side you will see the net change is always negative. So it does indicate that even the simulated models also do indicate a big reduction in yield across all the Ipcc mandate crops. Next one, please. So this is a graph that shows the impact of climate change on wheat yields. You have two graphs for each year. The left, the darker one is the control, and then the light shaded one is the adapted variety. And although by 2000 they are at the same level, but if you go towards 2050 and 2080, the yield is going to reduce by almost 45%, and the reduction will be much more in the control variety than the climate adapted variety, although the total yield is expected to be much, much less. Next one, please. This is going to be much more so in terms of yield loss in potato. I just took random examples which have shown a lot of changes, and compared to 2020, which is yield loss is about 3%, by 2050 we expect around 14% loss in potato productivity by 2050. Next one, please. So this is another study on both soybean and chickpea cropping systems at Dharwad. All that I wanted to emphasize here is that the soybean yields could reduce by about 31% with a 2°C increase under reduced rainfall scenario. It could even reduce by up to 60%. On the lower graph, the chickpea yield could reduce by 42% with a Celsius low rainfall, and it could even go down under the low rainfall area scenario by about 74%. This also indicates that winter crops such as chickpea could see a higher decrease in yield compared to the summer or rainy season crops. Next one, please. This is just an example to say that climate change is going to affect many areas. This is a long-term data of moisture index from Nalgonda district in Telangana. And between 1971 to 2004, you can see that from a dry, subhumid region, it is going towards arid region in Nalgonda. Maybe in another 10 to 20 years, Nalgonda may become one of the arid areas within southern India. Next one, please. Like what has happened in Anantapur. Next one. Again, if you look at the scenario here, there are going to be increased dryland areas due to climate change in the whole of India. And as you can see here, between 1971-90 to compared to 91 to 2004, the arid and semi-arid areas are increasing in states like Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, and Gujarat, although in other states also it is happening, but to a lesser degree. Next one, please. This next slide will give you, next one. Yeah, this will give you a better idea of what is happening. On the first bullet says the semi-arid areas have increased by 8.5 million hectare in Madhya Pradesh, Bihar, UP, Karnataka, and Punjab, and overall 3.4 million area has been added to the semi-arid tropics. And both dryness and wetness are increasing in different parts of India. So that is the scenario that we are going to have for the future. Next one, please. So the potential impacts of climate change, as you can see in this, is that crop area loss would be about more than 1.9 million square kilometers. And then, of course, there will also be a gain because, as Dr. Prabhakar was mentioning, some of the temperate areas or the hilly areas, new areas will get opened up. So that is the scenario that we are going to have. We are going to lose cultivated area in some portion of the world, whereas we may be opening up new areas in other parts of the world. Next one, please. So what are the impacts of the climate change on agriculture? As you can see here, we are going to see increased water scarcity and the frequency of droughts. Risk of heat and drought stress are going to increase both to the crops as well as to the livestock due to rise in temperature, as indicated by other speakers. I mentioned earlier the length of the growing period are likely to change, mostly a reduction in the length of the growing period because of increased temperatures. There will be accelerated physiological processes which hastens the maturation and thereby reducing the crop yields. Since there is an increase in nighttime respiration, this also could reduce the potential yield of many of the crops. Next one, please. If you look at the effect of climate change on pest and disease scenario, the dynamics and interaction among the species will be affected by climate change. Change in the pattern of pest damages that require new pest control strategies will increase, and the effectiveness of the pesticide will be reduced, and thereby we need to possibly use more pesticides, and that will result in more pesticide residues because of rise in temperatures. Next one, please. So in terms of climate variability impacts on farmers, farmers will see delayed sowing, sometimes maybe early sowing, but mostly delayed sowing, thereby change in the cropping pattern. So they may need different kinds of varieties which may be needed for delayed sowing, which can possibly mature early because the total duration may be reduced. So there will definitely be higher pest and disease incidence. So they need to be worried about managing those pest and diseases. There will be frequent and persistent droughts, and that need to be managed. There will be less water in the water bodies and the canals for use by the crops, and thereby there will be less profits because of high input costs, high wages, and then of course the stagnation of output prices, which is also mentioned by Dr. Prabhakar. There will all be shift from on-farm to non-farm occupations because people need incomes, so they will be going to non-farm occupations to maintain their families, to provide food and clothing, etc. for the families. This will also definitely lead to a lot of migration across the villages, from villages to cities, and cities to again maybe to the villages, because many people don't want to stay in cities nowadays, and then many of people may divest the assets that they have to manage the families. Next one, please. So this is a graph which I would like to emphasize upon, which we call it the hypothesis of hope. This was formulated by one of our earlier scientists, Dr. Peter Cooper. And if you see the leftmost and the rightmost, the blue boxes, the left one is the low input practices and the current climate. Whereas on the right is the improved practices with improved germplasm, which means climate change adapted germplasm, but with the current climate. So that is the current climate yield gap. So that is the very huge gap that we are seeing now. But if you see the first blue box and then the next blue box, the red box onto the blue one, the small one is low input practices with climate change. The blue one is low input practices with the current climate. So you will see that there is hardly any difference under the low input practices. So which means a smallholder farmer following low input practices may not really find that much of a reduction in yield. But you see the third or the middle box where it says improved practices with the climate change. So improved practices under the climate change can increase the yield to a large extent, and that is what we call the yield gap 1. And the fourth box is the improved practices with adapted germplasm and with climate change. So that is, again, there is a increase in yield. Whereas if you compare the fourth one with the last, the blue one, there is still a small gap because of the climate change that has happened. And all that I wanted to emphasize here is climate change will happen, because that is for certain. But as I said earlier, with technology and with innovations and with right policies, we can manage. And that is what I call the hypothesis of hope. With the right technology, with the right science, with the right policies, we can still manage to produce enough food for the population with the right kind of attitude that all of us can have. Next one, please. For all this to happen, we need to get ahead of the climate change, which means we need to have, as people said, adapted climate change, adapted varieties. As you can see here, we have 3 different varieties: the super early, the extra early, and the early maturing varieties, because we need to stay ahead of the game with very proactive breeding program. And also we need to develop core modeling capacities to ensure that this is maintained in all aspects of our work. Next one, please. This is a picture of pearl millet growing in summer at more than 40 degrees Celsius, which is considered unsuitable for any crop to grow, because they will not be able to set seed. But there is a particular hybrid which can set good amount of seed even at 40 degrees Celsius in summer. So this is an example of the resilience that we can breed into the crop varieties and hybrids to be adapted to climate change. Next one, please. So many times, as people said, adaptation is necessary, but then we also need to move also beyond adaptation, and we need to look at what are the effects or impacts resulting from the global warming, which is already unavoidable, and then which is happening. However, adaptation alone cannot cope with all the change. And then, as people said, countries need to have programs which can also mitigate. Both Dr. Vashisht as well as Dr. Prabhakar mentioned about the mitigation aspects of climate change, which the countries have to commit and organize. So therefore, to make development more sustainable, we can enhance both the mitigative as well as adaptive capacity, though by reducing emissions and vulnerability to climate change. Next one, please. So there will be many policy solutions that are needed. First of all, research centers will need more funds for agriculture research, and we need to adapt more holistic approaches. We need to organize efficient management of water, weather and climate services, land use practices, natural resource management, and then protection of biodiversity. These are all very much needed. And then the policy interventions are definitely needed. And a bigger involvement for the private sector, especially in terms of facilitating credit and the insurance schemes that are needed for the smallholder farmers. We also need policies that can help value chains. the smallholder farmers' role and participation in carbon emission trading schemes need to be enhanced and encouraged. And then, of course, we need to build capacity for collective action, not only for the farming community, but even the general public. For example, water literacy, that means efficient use of water in the households, how we can reduce water use or excess use of water or wastage of water. So those things also need to be enhanced to the whole population. Next one, please. So, as I said, we have no time to lose. Global warming tolerance thresholds are not too far. 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees could come very soon. Both adaptation and mitigation strategies are very crucial and critical. All countries must show the necessary political will. And of course, we need to generate bigger money to combat the current damages and also to cope with the future risks. I think that is all that I had, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for your listening. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much, sir. It was a wonderful lecture giving the overall scenario and what should be our strategies, basically, from varietal choice to technologies to how the adaptation and mitigation balances need to happen. And policies, right policies put together with technologies infused in the hope hypothesis. I think that should be the foundation probably on which we should build. And sir, thank you very much. I think we'll be discussing further later part of time. And we will go to the next presentation from Dr. Krishna Kumar, sir, former Deputy Director General ICR and also former Regional Representative South and Central Asia, Biodiversity International. So he would be speaking on climate change and impact on horticulture and its adaptation strategies. Swarna, you can introduce Dr. Krishna Kumar.
Okay, sir. Am I audible, sir?
Yeah.
We are delighted to introduce Dr. Krishna Kumar, former Deputy Director General Horticulture, ICR. He previously served as Director, National Bureau of Agriculturally Important Insects, Bangalore, and Acting Director at Indian Institute of Horticultural Research. He made remarkable contributions in horticulture pest management strategies, insect vector studies, molecular biology, and IPM. He developed DNA barcode for 50 different species of insect pests and designed species-specific markers for major insect pests of horticulture crops. He is associated with many national and international professional societies and is a key founding member of the Entomology Academy of India. He is also instrumental in acted as Biodiversity's international regional representative, and he provided scientific leadership for research activities on the management and use of agricultural biodiversity implemented in Central and South Asia. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Okay, now I'll share my screen, and thank you very much, Dr. Thonapi and the entire gamut of scientists who are here. So the time now is around 12:55. That's 5 minutes to 1. Probably just let me know if whenever you get bored, I can switch off. No issues. So
take your time, sir. Yeah.
I will just share my screen. Oh God, hold on. How do you go from one to another is something. Give me just 1 minute. Oh boy. Something else is coming, right? Let me just hold on. Oh boy. Can you give me just a minute? Because the slide I want to project and it's showing something else.
You can unshare it, sir, then select the.
Okay. Unfortunately, the technology is such that it becomes a little difficult for those who are a little not so tech savvy. Just hold on. I don't know if I go to something else, will I totally miss? That's the thing. That's all.
Right.
1 minute, hold on. Whole thing where
You open your presentation, sir, then you share it.
open my presentation. Unfortunately, what happens is just give me 1 second. It will come. Screening sharing has stopped as the sharing window is closed. Okay, what should I do now? Share screen.
Langon.
Which one? I don't know. There are so many
So
things.
share screen, sir.
I know share screen. Let
Yes,
me
sir.
see.
Now it is
PowerPoint can do this as the dialog box is open. Okay, hold on.
Sir, no problem. You can proceed that way also, sir.
Sir,
No, hold on.
first
The
you open the
product
slide,
is-
sir, then share it, sir.
1 minute, just 1 second. Yeah, I think
Yeah, go
I'm
to
on-
slide view, sir. Yeah.
something. It's okay.
First open your slide, then you can share it, sir.
Oh, just hold on.
Yeah, now slides are there, sir.
Slides are there. Just hold on. Just let me see whether the. Okay, I'll just manage. Don't worry. So the title was something else, but it's showing something else. But I had made it very critical. Specifically, I'll be talking about the climate change with very special reference to horticulture crops. But just I don't know, the slide that I prepared and what it is coming on the screen are two different things. So I really don't know what is the problem. It says.
Sir. Slideshow mode.
On 26th May 22, most features of the PowerPoint will be disabled. Security warning. Okay. Because this is not the one which I prepared, just because agriculture tree biodiversity is not the one which I wanted. Okay. That was a talk which I gave somewhere else. Just give me 1 minute. Huh? Okay. Yeah, okay. For some reason it's changing. Doesn't matter. The title, oh God, the aspect that I will be basically covering is the climate change vis-a-vis the horticulture, and what are the adaptation strategies? Oh boy, okay, adaptation strategies that we would be doing. I will also be little bit touching about on the biodiversity ecosystem services, which are really relevant more from the horticulture point of view, and also for having a sustainable development, which is the Millennium Development Goal in the era of climate change. So I would start the talk by quoting the reference from Brooks White, that I would feel more optimistic about a bright future if a human being spends less time proving that he can outwit nature, but rather spend more time tasting her sweetness and respecting her seniority. This goes in very apt to the point that we are discussing today, that the man himself thought he can outwit nature, and in the process he has created such an amount of disturbance in the normal way of life and equilibrium that we are faced with a consequence of climate change and many other things, which probably next to COVID is going to impact the human being if we don't take the decisions at the right time in the right way. Horticulture, when I mean, it includes a gamut of, each person has a different understanding. But for this lecture, we have fruits, vegetables, flowers, spices, medicinal and aromatic crops, and plantation crops, and in between mushrooms and many other things. So it is horticulture itself covers a spectrum of crops, and it is difficult to put everything in one nutshell, and also considering each one has got its own geographical necessities, adaptability, etc. Now, when we talk of horticulture, most of them view it fundamentally through fruits and vegetables. Certainly our 325 million tons basically comes from about 60% through vegetables, about 38% through fruits, which is increasing day by day. This is an old statistic, but at the same time, you can also see that many other crops which are low volume and high value contribute very significantly to the export potential of horticulture crops. And when we mean horticulture, it is a bounty of nature. It is an answer to sustainability. It is the best alternative to ecologically and economically mitigate whatever that is there of the climate change. And if we don't do it in the right way, you can see that Sadhguru, when he says plants millions of trees, what he really means is the answers to mitigating many of our problems is through forest, is through agroforestry, more trees, carbon sequestration, and many other things that go with it. And horticulture has to play a very, very significant role. And please forgive me if I say a much more significant role in this era of climate change than many of the field crops, which through monocropping has brought more catastrophe than good. I will probably, many have said that, but I would only like to say that the poverty of nearly 25% poverty that you have, most of them are 75% of the below poverty line we see nowadays in the villages, and that too India is now highly malnourished, is everybody is aware. So our main priority is enhancing food and nutritional security. Unfortunately, when we say food production, we only talk of cereals, pulses, oil seeds, coarse cereals, etc. We don't consider horticulture as a part of food, at least in the agricultural departments and many other things. But if you are talking about nutritional security with food security, I think there is a tremendous role to play for horticulture. And horticulture has to have a number of problems. It is, we are thinking of nutritional security with sustainability is the jargon for future horticulture. The problems is, we all are aware of the tremendous, we pat our back with regard to green revolution, hybrids, plant protection. But what really has happened is our per capita consumption of proteins has come down over years in spite of the production, water table, environment, pest and diseases, somewhere we have gone wrong. It is not productive. There is a common belief that the productivity and sustainability don't go together. But as Dr. Gowda suggested, that our productivity with sustainability is the answer that science should provide. And without each one of them, we are going to lose very critically in the era of climate change. And you can see both with respect to the calories intake, we are at the South Asia is at the rock bottom. I don't specifically talk about India, but the general South Asia, because geographically the South Asia represents a region which really needs attention, both with respect to fragmented landscape, fragmented holdings, which is putting pressure on the land, as well as in the availability of. So the technological innovation is key to making our qualitative and quantitative improvements. So I will not go, but only last sentence, that last line I would like to say, can this green revolution go without sustainability? If you lose your sustainability, you are a cannon fodder to climate change. Global warming is being talked about by different persons, and it's like 5 blind men touching the elephant. But the scientific community has now clearly said, climate change is here to stay, but the magnitude and the direction of the climate change can be a little bit point of discussion. But what is true is, climate change will certainly is contributing to global warming, increase in the mean sea level, increase in the communicable and vector-borne diseases, and of course, a lot of it by the previous worker has been talked about the carbon. Horticulture crops are much more sensitive than field crops for climate change, whether it is temperature, whether it is, many other problems associated with it, global warming, or even with regard, for example, I can lose a couple of plants of millets or rice or wheat, but I cannot lose a couple of mango trees or jackfruits or whatever it is. And they, being by very perennial in nature, orchards are one of our best answers to mitigate the climate change. The reality that you are seeing is this is not something that I have taken out, but this is something, a reality which many parts of our arid zones and semi-arid zones are also facing. Luckily, we have not had the kind of drought that we used to face, but 2-3 years of drought. You must have read already India has stopped export of wheat because of our decrease in productivity due to terminal heat. And this, coupled with a couple of years of drought, can have an impact on across all spectrum of our agriculture. So there is a need to educate. There are still in the scientific community who are skeptics, and more important than the scientists, the policymakers don't seem to understand the gamut of problems associated with climate change. Somebody was earlier telling sustainability and productivity are two sides of the same coin. They are not two sides of the same coin that are mutually exclusive, but they are the same sides of the same coin. What did we learn from the unprecedented heat? In fact, I was in Bangalore about last 10 to 15 days back, about a week or 10 days. It was extremely unbearable, even in a place like Bangalore, to stay. And even I felt as though the AC is not able to provide adequate relief. So that's the kind of impact we are saying, maybe for a short duration, but it can cause tremendous. The question that is also being asked is, has the rainfall reduced over time? Why new pests are becoming more? Why the destruction of forest, is it causing more and more animal conflict? Urban migration. So the answer is, there is a lot of deforestation that's going on. Habitat loss is there. And unless we plant more trees, partly through forest and partly through agroforestry and the horticulture as a component of agroforestry, I think we are going to have more problems. We did not learn many of the, from the climate change disasters like Uttarakhand disasters, Srinagar flooding, cyclone, Chennai flooding, tsunami, loss of life. There is a writing on the wall that many of these events are going to take place. And probably the scientific community is telling the intensity is going to be more. And we have to, for example, the loss of mangroves. Why this is very specifically, I am telling, when we talk about horticulture, we are very much concerned about the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. It is not just an LTC center. Without the mangroves, Andaman will be gone. So the trees provide that kind of a barrier. But not all climate changes can have extremely negative effect. It is said that in certain parts of temperate regions where they were totally covered always with the ice, the melting of ice probably can bring certain areas under cultivation in crops like apple. This is still speculative, but the data needs to be. When we gain somewhere, we also lose somewhere, should be the point that should be of our concern. But the fact of the matter is, the South Asia and Southeast Asia tropical regions are extremely rich in diversity, and they have evolved over millions of years for many of these climate change adaptations. And unless we conserve those genetic diversity, the gene pool that is there in the diversity will be very, very critical. For example, in the case of mango, our agriculture minister, then Sharad Pawar, always used to say that I always have a problem with Alfonso mango. It is late flowering, 2 times flowering, and everything they are attributing to climate change. But if you want answers, look into the gene pool. When we mean by climate change, biodiversity, ecosystem services are all interlinked. When we mean the true meaning of biodiversity, the biodiversity should be in equilibrium. When biodiversity is equilibrium, the ecosystem services contribute to agriculture, and an equilibrium of biodiversity is a good indicator that climate change impact have been very little. But we are seeing that the honeybees are totally going off. The soil fertility has come down. Water table has gone beyond the limit. Pests are becoming more. Local climate is becoming extremely warm. And in all these species are becoming extinct, very clearly indicates that the climate change is impacting the biodiversity so much so that we are going to pay a price if we don't address this. Horticulture has contributed immensely. For example, we can proudly say that we are one of the very few countries where the entire seed requirement of potato basically comes from the our public sector pool, which is later on translated in many other methods, nearly to 90 to 95%. Each one of the potato varieties, for example, late blight, let me tell you, extremely unseasonal rainfall can trigger late blight in potato, which can easily bring down our production from 40 to 50 million tons to almost about 40, to 40 plus or a little bit less than 40. And India is a country where we don't have a lot of elasticity with our production. 5 million tons more, you have a glut. 5 million tons less, you have a problem. We all were witness to West Bengal not allowing potato to go to Orissa, and Orissa in turn blocking the rail traffic simply because the potato became in short supply. And that is mainly triggered by the late blight, which is again a factor that could be very closely associated with the climate change. One of the best things that is there in this country is we have a large pool of arid and semi-arid regions, what we call dryland horticulture. And we have a number of plants such as bear, where now pomegranate is also expanding into those regions. We have onla and many others, and they can be one of the, I have worked in Gujarat, and it is seen to be believed to what an extent a bear can provide wonderful nutrition, production, productivity, and answer to many of our problems under extremely climate change scenarios. Unfortunately, we have become prisoners of certain selected varieties of apple and some other imported fruits, forgetting our own native species. We have an innumerable number of species like this. For example, this is the diversity of banana that we have. Each variety of banana has got a geotag, and they have evolved for a particular taste and particular adaptability. But what is happening is in horticulture, because of the tissue culture protocol that is easily available for G9, nearly 65 to 70% of the plants are planted with tissue culture plants and destroying the diversity that is associated with the traditional cultivars. The horticulture scenario, if we have to address, for example, let me tell you, most of the bananas that we are consuming today is G9. And G9 came because one of the varieties, Gros Mitchell, totally got eliminated due to fusarium wilt. But for a single clone that was conserved in Kew Gardens, we would not have had the present banana. So you can understand to what extent the diversity contributes in having a resistance in a world which is impacted by global change, global climate change, as well as by a globalization of the entire world. Horticulture provides innumerable diversity from leafy vegetables to fruits. You name the segment and family, you have the diversity. But what have we become prisoners? We have become prisoners of carrots and cauliflowers and capsicum, which look glossy. More and more, food safety is lacking, but we are not providing the kind of, this is not about research. This is more about our marketing strategies and the policy issues. Most of the Indians, especially vegetarians, suffer from vitamin D deficiency. Mushrooms, for example, China consumes per capita consumption of mushroom in China is around 1,350 to 1,500 grams per year. And in India, we consume about 40 grams. This does not require fertilizer. This does not require pesticides. This does not guzzle water like many other crops. This is something which can provide a beautiful boost for our especially vitamin D requirement. And with more and more urbanization, mushrooms are going to be in demand. These are all some of the underutilized crop species that are there in the Northeast as well as in the Eastern coast. And I have tasted many of them. They are just wonderful. They are waiting only to be mainstreamed because These are the varieties, whether it is the huge cyclone that sweeps the eastern coast, or the other intense precipitation, or the scorching heat. These are the varieties that have very well adopted, and they hold the answers to many of the problems that are associated. Many of them are in fact free of fruit flies. We did a small study when I was in DDG Horticulture and in collaboration with Biodiversity International. When we talk mango, we always think mango through the prism of fruits. But pickle is a $1 billion industry. And this is a small pickle which we call as apemidi in south, and in some parts of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, it is called as mavud. And here what happens is, when we try to map the diversity, this is only one slide. We collected hundreds of small apemidi mangoes which can be directly pickled, and some of them have absolutely camphor flavor, cumin flavor. But I'm not talking about only the diversity, but these are the mangoes that are conserved in native land along the river belt, along the path of the stream, and that provide wonderful answers to pollinators, conserve the topsoil, as well as they prevent the soil erosion. And that way, these are all the things that should be mainstream for us to go forward if we have to. We have to make mango is not just only fruits. It is not only Alfonso. The pickling mango is something that the investments will go. I don't know how many of you are aware, in the Great Bengal famine that was there immediately after the Second World War, the state of Kerala did not suffer from any impact of hunger or anything, because the Maharaja of Travancore had introduced cassava and many other tuber crops into Kerala. So when the entire nation suffered due to lack of rice and other crops, Kerala did not suffer because they were extremely adaptive to the scenario and basically saved the most parts of Kerala and coastal region because of this. These are the crops that need to be given much higher boost. They are high in starch and can provide a stiff competition to potato in starch as well as in chips and many others, provided we mainstream them. This is one of the varieties which is resistant to cassava mosaic virus. The whitefly, when the era of climate change, when we are talking about vector-borne diseases are not just for humans. They are equally common for plants. Whitefly, thrips, mites, and many other leaf hoppers, plant hoppers, all of them are going to have a field day with the global warming and very erratic precipitation. And when they increase in large number, as you saw in case of whiteflies in Punjab and the leaf curl virus in Madhya Pradesh, immediately after cotton, the mealybug problem, now the thrips parvis spinus that is sweeping Andhra Pradesh and parts of Karnataka and Telangana, you have a problem on your hand unless and until we mitigate the rising global temperature. In addition to some of these crops, you can see the kind of diversity, for example, carambola, kirni, jamun, custard apple. They are extremely well adapted to the dry land climate, and they can be very well. We require a horticulture diversity and not monocropping. And this is just to show some of the fruits. For example, one of the species of custard apple is what we call Hanuman Phal. Is now marketed at about 250 to 300 rupees per kilo because they say that it has got very anti-carcinogenic properties. And those things, investments have to be really looked into, because a horticulture segment combined with medicinal segment can provide high value to the farmers and thereby mitigating some of his loss. These are other minor vegetables, chow chow and many others that I will not go into. Yes, please.
Sir, excuse me, sir, we are not seeing your slide.
You are not seeing my slide?
No, sir, but since from the beginning we are hearing your audio only.
Okay, hold on. You should have told me earlier.
I thought that that slides sharing some problem was there.
No.
You told earlier, so we thought that we are going to give.
Hold on.
Yes, sir.
Here. Are you able to see the slides?
It is coming, sir. Yeah, now it has come.
Okay, now what I will do is, since you have listened to my talk, I
Yes,
will just in a fraction of a second go through the slides.
Okay,
And
sir.
then I'll continue. Okay.
Wonderful, sir.
Yeah. So here I was. Now you got a glimpse of what all. Now I'll come to the roadmap is, how do we mitigate climate change? The answer to mitigating many of the climate changes, we have to look for the crop wild relatives, whether it is horticulture crops or whether it is field crops, or you better get a best European dog, and they say that it is susceptible to many of our problems. Our desi cattle are more environmentally resistant. Our millets are much more. But if you try to grow apples in tropical and subtropical, you have a problem. So there is an adaptability. But within a crop range, you have the wild species which are extremely resistant, whether heat tolerance or flooding. For example, in case of vegetables, we do a grafting basically because they can provide answers to many of our abiotic and biotic problems. So the roadmap is we have to conserve the wild relatives in our adaptation to climate change. Most of the hybrids and other things that we have evolved, whether it is wheat, whether it is rice, they all have their including maize, which is teosinte. But the progenitors were not the cultivated farms that you are seeing today. The genes have come from the wild. So we are with the deforestation, tremendously we are losing the crop wild relatives. In Biodiversity International, we were extremely focusing on just don't go on collecting accessions for the sake of numbers, but do targeted collections of wild species and trait-specific collections. They will add up, and you should be really looking to heat-tolerant lines that are tolerant to flooding, lines that are tolerant to salinity, lines that are tolerant to different abiotic and biotic stress. So those kinds of targeted collections will make a difference. And believe me, for example, sweet potato weevil. Sweet potato weevil is a problem across the world. And we have tremendous number of germplasm. Till today, we don't have any answers. But if you look into the wild and introgress those genes, you will be having an excellent answers to the sweet potato weevil. What is the answer? What is the advantage? Sweet potatoes are our best insurance for climate change. So you have to be strategic in our approach with regard to how do we plan our research. Horticulture and forestry, horticulture and agroforestry, again, I can say are two sides of the same coin. There are horticulture just on the fringes of forest, within the forest, and it's specialized farming. They can provide a number of answers. But horticulture component is very critical. The forestry component is very critical for one reason. The forest, by being its own diversity, provides innumerable scope for the conservations of pollinators. Today, the wild bee Apis dorsata has is disappearing from the Western Ghats. And the nesting sites are rare, the colony size is small, the forest fires are becoming more. As a result, we have to be extremely careful about in horticulture crops, which also translate to many other crops like sunflower and others, that we have to, through horticulture crops, which are basically flowering plants, they have very beautiful, wonderful nectar and pollen source, and they contribute significantly. And if you want to arrest the climate change, or I'll put the other way around, if global warming takes place and climate change is the pathway, be sure that one of the first impacts, which our Honorable Prime Minister made in the mention in the first Agrobiodiversity Congress is, it will seriously impact the pollinators. And seed production. How are you going to go excellent seed production without pollinators? Without pollinators, if pollinators decrease, the seed quality and seed production decreases. And you can say that pollination efficiency is inversely proportional to the temperature, with a barring a few species. This is something which I would like to draw our attention, that whenever we collect pollen, we want to collect honey, we used to destroy the whole beehive. And then here, two of the father and son, they developed a method by which you turn the tap and you can automatically collect the honey. Those kinds of innovations are answers whereby you don't destroy the colony, but you take whatever you want. That is called something like a win-win situation. Unfortunately, our innovativeness with regard to some of these problems are very limited. I have been requesting for the last 3 to 4 years, some of our pollinators group to combine with our engineers to come out with this kind of a thing. Unfortunately, it has not cut much ice. The key is climate change cannot be viewed only from the perspective of agriculture without looking into the forest. Forest restoration is the key, because forest stabilize all kinds of ecosystems. Your monsoons are dependent on forest. And when you want to have forest, now it has become a fashion. Every school-going college girl says, I want to plant trees, and they will simply plant trees without knowing what tree to plant where. There are trees that are for shade. There are trees that are to be, for example, it seems that Emperor Ashoka wanted to plant some trees in the northern belt, Akbar. Then he asked Birbal, shall I plant mango because it is very, very profitable? Birbal said, no. He said, why? You come with me. And then both of them were traveling in the hot sun and rested underneath a mango tree. They were full of slug caterpillars. When Akbar sat, he had an itching for at least 2 days. That's why Akbar said, when people take shade under a mango tree, it is very much possible that it will be infested with slug caterpillars and you are creating more problems. There are problems to check water conservation, soil conservation. There are problems. For example, one of the things that we are talking for the reasons of climate change and small hillocks collapsing in the Western Ghats is indiscriminate cultivation of ginger. When you cultivate indiscriminately ginger, you are eroding the soil. When the top layers are not covered, you are going to translate it into soil erosion. And the flooding that takes place is more damaging because of the silt that flows through the floods. I will not go into this, but there is a need for a genetic diversity. And I'm just telling how many forests are. Forest, I'm again concerned with regard to horticulture for one of the reasons being 90% of our medicinal resources that we are having today, Ayurveda and many others, they actually come through the forest. Our persons just go to the forest, they know what plant to pluck, and they come. We are tremendously losing the genetic wealth associated with medicinal plants in different forests. And this is something that with not only deforestation, indiscriminate removal, with the increased urbanization, loss of forest habitat, Ayurveda and homeopathy, you know how much the Indian government is promoting. The strength comes from our forest. So these are critical in order to, and believe me, in the days to come, none of us will be able to afford the kind of medical bill unless we adopt to these kinds of medicines. Now, these are some of the important medicinal plants. Unfortunately, the quality planting material is not there. They are used, I will not go into many details, but conservation is the key, and the quality, genetic purity of medicinal plants and the seed quality. Because medicinal plant, we are only exporting raw material, but the finished material is at least 500 to 1000% more than the raw material. For example, let me tell you, the velvet bean that we are exporting at 800 rupees to 1000 rupees per kilo, it comes back with certain neuromedicines, which will cost, if you translate that into real value, it is astronomical. So certification, training, so many things, investments, policy, we are lacking in our policies. We only say about locust when immediately locust comes. And after another few months, locust is forgotten. This is not something which needs to be done. There are farmers who are actually involved in conservation of the local species, wild species. They need to be encouraged. I will not go into this. For example, what did we do with pomegranate? It's an arid crop. We brought it to semi-arid regions and we want to grow in every place, and we had a bacterial blight. If somebody, there is a crosstalk, please, I would request them to avoid. Dr. Uday Kumar Dalvi, please, can you be mute? So what I am requesting, what I am telling is, if the same kind of delayed monsoon that we are witnessing year after year after year, you are going to have a very serious bacterial blight. And if the trend continues, either we have to forego the Bahar, one Bahar, Mrig Bahar, and otherwise we may have to indiscriminately use plant protection measures if under the influence of climate change. Already we are saying successively in Western Ghats, extreme delay in the withdrawal of the southwest monsoon and very intense precipitation. And that will tremendously contribute to the production of pomegranate, which is one of the key crops of Maharashtra. Horticulture mitigation strategies have always relied upon the rootstocks. Just one rootstock, dog ridge, has contributed to thousands of crores. In fact, all the rootstock grapes that you are seeing today in Maharashtra and northern Karnataka is dependent on dog ridge. And what horticulture, crop wild species are not just for breeding, but as a rootstock, they are much more important and can provide a wonderful answer for mitigation of climate change. Even in the case of vegetables, for example, Solanum tarum as a rootstock can very effectively, for at least 5, 6 to 10 days, can mitigate the stagnation of water in the field, which otherwise they will totally wilt. But we have not done enough. When we talk about climate change, we talk more about drought. When Dr. Ayyappan used to be there, we always used to tell about preparedness for southwest monsoon. And I used to laugh. I told him, sir, you are preparing for drought. And as the season ends, you will be calling me for intense precipitation and stagnation and flooding. So this flooding is becoming more a problem under the influence of climate change. And we have to develop very strong rootstock based such as strategies in horticulture crops so that we are in a better position. Another problem we are noticing with intense precipitation is the incidence of Phytophthora. Phytophthora, when it comes due to intense precipitation, even for 2, 3, 4 days, the entire 100% crop of chili peppers, bell peppers, tomato. In fact, there is a sudden spurt in the tomato price. It is because of late blight. And the incidence of late blight is likely to increase with this kind of a climate change. But our adaptation strategies must be, for example, in the case of oil palm, which most of you are aware is one of the key components of the West Godavari, East Godavari, and many other districts. We have to increase through a scientific-based cropping system, the income of the farmer so that he doesn't lose. And cocoa has come out with one of the best answers, though it performs better in coconut intercropping. Certainly, along with oil palm, it fetches at least 1 lakh additional income per hectare, which contributes. So these kinds of the cropping system is really required. And this is something like the wild different fruits, which I'll not go. The same thing applies. This is with respect to cashew. Cashew is one crop where our supply demand, if you look, Supply is limited and demand is more, and it is still increasing. And for that to increase, we have to provide the planting material. Thanks to the work carried out by the scientists with regard to the softwood grafting, we are able to do area expansion in cashew. Why cashew? Cashew comes in lateritic, so very poor soils, and one of the best answers to soil erosion, high temperature, and can contribute significantly to the economic income of the farmer.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes?
So we are already late by 30 minutes.
If you want me, I'll close.
Sir, another 5 minutes, sir, if you don't mind.
Oh, yes, no problem.
Thank you, sir.
Now, soil health is one of the things that really looked into, which all of us have forgotten. Climate change can drastically impact the soil microarthropods on which nobody is working. Nobody is working in the country. When we talk about soil health, we are talking about soil microarthropods and soil microorganisms. The interplay of this, even a small temperature or humidity or anything that totally, we published a paper in Kerala after drought and after floods, what happens to the microarthropods? 70% destruction was there of the microarthropods after one drought followed by very heavy flood. And most of them are microscopic organisms. The vector-borne diseases, as we are talking, everybody knows about chikungunya, dengue, and many others. They are going to be there. Your answers to mitigation of this climate change is introgression of the genes from the wild. Unfortunately, more number of interspecific crosses we are not making that can provide sustainable development. Whether it is okra or mung bean or custard apple, all our production today, what we are talking, has come from genes from the wild. One of the things of climate change that can impact especially the global warming or heat is the pollen dehiscence and stigma receptivity. I don't know whether you are looking into the really in terms of the cereals. Stigma receptivity is a very, very critical character along with pollen dehiscence, and stigma receptivity is a very, very brief period. Stigma receptivity is influenced by the microbiome that is associated with the stigma, and small fluctuations in temperature, simply the stigma doesn't become receptive, probably because of the microbiome associated with it. That means, like we say, an expert is one who knows more and more about less and less. We have to look for those kinds of things. This is, I told you about late blight in potato, but late blight in tomato, late blight in peppers due to climate change. And one of the best answers provided is the national system provided a simulated model whereby we can excellently predict the incidence of late blight, and thereby, believe me, the contribution of ICR we are able to save to the tune of 8 to 9 million tons of potato every year through Indoblast for forecasting. Protected cultivation has come in a big way with regard to managing many of the climatic adversaries, but it has also come with certain problems. But in future, with increased urbanization, protected cultivation is going to be the order of the day, and that can provide excellent answers around cities for mitigating many of the horticultural shortages. This custard apple is extremely a dry crop, but we are looking only the custard apple. But muricata, Annona muricata, is an extremely medicinal plant which can be used in dryland cropping system. Horticulture segment is moving from seed to seedlings, and in the era of climate change, there is a need to bring in the seedling industry more robust, especially in the northern parts of the country where this is lacking. The answer is a farmer should not lose his seedlings because he is anticipating the monsoon. He should not say that still it's a gamble in the monsoon. Seedlings in pro-trace under protected cultivation can provide the farmer a door delivery of seedlings at the most opportune time. Everybody talks about BT brinjal. This is my own experiment where we carried out BT brinjal and a shade net. I told anybody who finds one borer fruit, I will give them 10 healthy fruits free. There was not a single borer. There was no leaf hopper. There was zero pesticides. So the answers to many of the problems like borers and others which are likely to increase can come by simple technologies. This is fusarium wilt which is expanding. International collaboration is the key. Mera Bharat Mahan to theek hai, lekin there are many Mahans in different parts of the world. We have to introgress there. Organic farming is one of the wonderful answers to sustainability, but the organic farming plus and minuses have to be seriously viewed, which crop, which place, what segment we are marketing, etc. The participation of women, pickles, I told you already, minor crops, and I will not go into this. I'll come straight away to some of the important. Coconut. The demand for coconut is increasing, all aspects of coconut, copra, tender coconut, but unfortunately the supply is coming down. There is a serious need. Phytoplasmas are playing havoc across horticulture crops. We are not having, after Rai Chaudhary, a single group working on phytoplasma, and they are going to create problems because phytoplasmas are transmitted by leaf hoppers, plant hoppers, and psyllids, which survive very well under high temperature. Indian edible oil segment is looking seriously in a, you know what happened after the Ukraine war and many others. The horticulture segment should seriously look into the, for example, we are importing 15,000 to 20,000 crores rupees worth of palm oil, this olive oil. We planted olive oil in our olives in Rajasthan and miserably failed, saying that it does not perform. A scientific analysis is required to replace this edible oil segment. Cropping system, these are the things that will stabilize the ecosystem, and an alternative income in the adverse effect of climate change will make the farmer more resilient. So this is some of the examples with biological control, which we have to reduce pesticide. If there is one aspect which destroys biodiversity and ecosystem services, it is pesticides. In future, sustainability should go more towards this line, in addition to conserving many of this. The participation of women, the education of women in climate change is very critical. These are some of the aspects with regard to Andaman and Nicobar. We should look seriously into Andaman and Nicobar as a horticulture and biodiversity hotspot. So thank you very much. I have in a very short time covered a spectrum. If there are any questions, you can flag. I will be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, sir, for giving a scenario of crop-wise and country and region-wise impact and adaptation strategies on horticulture crops. Quoting the fine examples on banana, mavadu mango, cassava, potato, pomegranate, grapes, oil palm, vegetable crops, and many more crops. Targeted collection to cater the needs in the climate change scenario, which is also highlighted by you. The importance of forest biodiversity for pollinators, very important. Forest restoration is the key for climate change mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. 90% of the medicinal resources are coming from the forest. We need to conserve forest. Quality seed material is a major concern for medicinal plants. Soil health and soil microbes, quality seedlings, organic farming, coconut, edible oil, whatnot. You covered everything from horticulture crop. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, we have few questions on the chat box for both the speakers. I request first Dr. Gowda, sir. Sir, you are there, sir. Dr. Gowda, sir. Sir, please, you can answer your slide, sir. Yeah, thank you. Sir, Krishnakumar, sir, you have two questions.
Yeah.
See, what are the impacts of converting diverse forests to plantations like rubber, oil palm, etc., and result on climate change?
The answer, I would put it up like this. We can have all forest and no climate change, or we can also should have a cropping system where we have to address our food and nutritional requirements. The bane seems to be monocropping, whether extensive rubber, extensive oil palm. Oil palm, I would be very, very skeptical because it's an extremely water guzzling crop. But it's a devil's alternative. One side there is a deep sea and behind you there is a devil. So we have to scientifically calibrate in crops like oil palm, where, how much, certainly not Andamans. There was a move to plant oil palm in Andamans. That will be absolutely suicidal because Andaman is a biodiversity hotspot. Whereas there are innumerable places within the country, Northeast and many other places where water is not a limitation. We should go into this. But intercropping, avoiding the monocropping, and cropping system approach, enhancing the productivity. For example, they have identified markers for Dura and Piscifera. Our yield now is about 10 to 12 tons, but it can easily go to 50 tons. So when you increase the productivity, but yesterday I have sent a mail to Dr. Director, he should prepare an action plan for oil palm in the changing. For example, all of a sudden you don't have 17% oil coming from sunflower. So there are issues that have to be practical. There are issues that have to be sustainable. Each problem has a different set of answers, and accordingly, a think tank should be there to come up with the solutions. I can share the presentation I will share. Anybody could utilize. What is the difference between phytoplasma and mycoplasma? The mycoplasmas that occur on the cell wall-less bacteria are called mycoplasma, and when they come on plants, they are called as the phytoplasma. In fact, the greatest invasives that are happening across crops is in phytoplasma, and we don't have even one expert working on phytoplasmas in the country, which is unfortunate. And if you really, you name the crop, it is coming. I can share my presentation. Request for forest trees which can fix highest carbon credits. I'll share with you. The presentation I will share. Enjoyed the professor, nice presentation. Stigma receptivity, I would like to tell, this is very, very critical with regard to the climate change. My student, she is working on the microbiomes associated with stigma in Sweden. Now, why I was really fascinated as to why she is looking into it. For example, what happened to terminal heat, and why did terminal heat result in millions of tons of wheat production going down? You have to go very close at the cellular level to understand what is happening. And neither wheat nor okra nor tomato is a species by itself. We are all surrounded by microbiomes. These microbiomes are the interactive forces between what is happening in the environment and what happens to a particular, like our gut microbiome. For example, let me also quote, somebody has synthesized artificially honey by taking the gut microbiome and putting them in a nectar, and through a process of centrifugation, artificially has synthesized honey. So we have to understand the role of this in many things. The day we understand the role of microbes in the climate change vis-a-vis agriculture, we are going to contribute a lot. This requires a dedicated set of persons to look into each and every stigma associated with wild species, stigma associated with crop wild relatives, related species, what is common, what is not common, what is the microbiome associated in hot regions. If you go that, and same thing applies to root biome, rhizosphere biome. So these kinds of answers will be able to provide much better answers in mitigating the climate change. So this is what I would say, but this is a topic which I would not. What should be the strategy to local germplasm of horticulture crops? Encourage what we call it as the custodian farming. ICR cannot conserve. ICR cannot conserve. We cannot go on giving money, but encourage farmers who are conserving very valuable. Give them an award. Give them some patting on the back. They are so happy, and that is one of the best answers. The second answer is develop cryoconservation protocol. Conserve the pollen. It is cheap. It doesn't take space, and you can utilize any particular time. So these are some of the answers to the questions that were raised.
Thank you so much, sir. I thank both stalwart speakers, Dr. C.L. Gowda and Krishna Kumar sir, for their excellent presentation on behalf of the COPA and also IAMR. I thank both the speakers, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we will move on to next session, that is lunch session. So we will leave now and we will come back.
We will be joining back at 2:15.
Thank you. I thank Thonapi and also IAMR and all the participants for the patient listening. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we'll be joining back at 2:15. We have 2 lectures on aquaculture and climate change. by Dr. N.K. Chadha and also Muralidhar from SIBA and the CIFE. Then we have a very important presentation by Dr. Bhupen Dubey, Global CEO, Advanta Seeds Limited. So it is again the seed industry challenges before it in order to have food and nutrition security. Then we have a lecture on agroforestry and climate change by Rajeshwar Rao. Then very important at the end of that session would be India's clean energy transition by Dr. Y.B. Ramakrishna, India Chair on Clean Energy. So this will be the next session. So kindly join sharply at 2:15. So we'll be going ahead with that. So you can be logging in or you stay with us and have your lunch, and we'll come back at 2:15. So thank you very much.